Hi, please do consider subscribe to this channel. Credit to the author. Chapter 11 to 30. Horse carriage. That's very expensive. Who can afford that? Expect for those wealthy old masters in town. Our village doesn't have a lot of farmland, so there wasn't anyone who raised cattle. However, Uncle Ma, from the neighboring village, has a donkey cart. He usually helps transport goods, but when he's free, he would also give people a ride to town. Yu Shaolian chirped a reply. Yu Heng seemed to have understood Xiao Xiao's intentions. After a moment of deliberation, he said, "We still have enough firewood at home. Why don't I accompany you to town?" Yu Xiao was certainly pleased with his offer, so she hastily nodded. She had wanted to go by herself, but she didn't know the direction. Yu Shaolian also wanted to go with them when she heard her eldest brother's suggestion to accompany her younger sister to town. However, she knew that if she followed them, then her mother would be responsible for all the chores in the family. Shaolian looked at her younger sister's pale face, set down the sickle in her hand, and whispered, "Wait for a moment." After that, she ran into the courtyard. A while later, under her siblings' puzzled gaze, Shaolian rushed out again and took out a small cloth bag in a mysterious manner. She pulled out several copper coins from the bag and said with a smile, "It's younger sister's first time going to town, so you guys should ride the donkey cart." "Where did you get these copper coins?" Yu Heng was surprised. All of their family's income must be handed to and kept by their grandmother. With their grandmother's stingy character, even a deity can't take away a copper coin from her hand. Shaolian gave them a mysterious smile, looked around, and whispered, "Didn't Dr. Yu teach us how to distinguish medical herbs? While collecting fishworts, I would also dig up herbs that I come across and save them up. Then, I sold the herbs that I saved up to a pharmacy and earned a few copper coins. I had originally wanted to buy some candies for younger sister. She can eat the candy after drinking her medication and change the bitter taste in her mouth." Yu Xiao felt very touched as she held the 6 copper coins within her hand. She swiftly put away the money and said, "I'm borrowing these copper coins from you. When I have money in the future, I'll pay you back twice as much. We're family, so there's no need to mention that. It's getting late already. If you guys don't hurry and leave, you might miss the donkey cart. Remember to come back early. Otherwise, grandmother will scold you guys again." Yu Xiao wasn't sure where Shaolian inherited her frank and brisk personality, but she really likes her this way. Yu Heng took the earthen jar from his sister's hands, then they quickly walked towards the neighboring village. About 30 minutes later, they saw Ma Dafu pulling his donkey cart at the entrance of the village. Although it only cost 2 copper coins for each person, there weren't many people who were willing to spend money to ride on the cart these days. On the donkey cart, there were only 2 women who were taking eggs or vegetables to the morning market. However, there were quite a lot of baskets on the cart. "Uncle Ma, my sister and I want to go to town. Please give us a ride." Yu Heng had been to town several times in the past when he followed his father to sell the game that they had caught. Thus, he had ridden on Ma Dafu's donkey cart before. Ma Dafu naturally wouldn't reject them since it was an opportunity to earn money. He answered with a smile, "Isn't this brother Dahai's son, Xiaoxia? Is this your younger sister, Shaolian? Quickly get on." The women on the cart sheepishly moved their baskets and emptied a small area for them. Yu Heng lifted his sister up onto the cart, then he went and sat on the thill one beside Ma Dafu. The corners of Yu Xiao's mouth twitched. She seriously didn't know how to describe the feeling of being carried by a 10-year-old child. The donkey swiftly trotted forward. It would have originally taken over 2 hours to reach the town by foot, but the duration of the trip was shortened by nearly half now. The siblings finally arrived in town at around 8 in the morning. This small town, Tanggu Town, was just an ordinary coastal town. It only takes about an hour to travel from the east side of town to the west side. However, it was a necessary route from the harbor to the Maritime Protection Bureau. Thus, despite being small, it was a rather prosperous town. The entrance of the small town was crowded with people rushing to the morning market. Xiao and her eldest brother thanked Uncle Ma and paid him 4 copper coins for the ride. Ma Dafu warmly told them the departure time for the return trip, and he also reminded them to meet him at the same gate. After bidding farewell to Uncle Ma, the siblings walked on the bustling street, which was wide enough for 2 horse carriages to run side by side. They would occasionally see horse wagons filled with cargoes from the wharf rushing through the streets. This town was also an essential route for transporting ocean freights to the capital. Thus, it was no wonder that this town was so lively. Both sides of the street were filled with stores. There were so many stores lined up one after another that the siblings didn't even have time to see everything. Yu Xiaoxiao was eager to sell the abalones in her hands, so she turned her head towards Yu Heng and asked, "Eldest brother, do you know where the biggest restaurant in town is? Let's just go there directly. There are 2 famous restaurants in this town. One is called Fulin Restaurant, while the other one is Junshou Restaurant. Father also sells his prey to these 2 restaurants first. Fulin Restaurant is closer to here, should we go there first and ask?" Yu Heng has been here several times, so he's somewhat familiar with this town. Fulin Restaurant was a 2-story restaurant. It appeared to be a long-standing business that gave off a sense of simplicity and elegance. The siblings stood briefly in front of the entrance. It wasn't time for them to open the door for business yet, so there was only a young waiter. He was holding a broom and yawning lazily, while sluggishly sweeping the floor. When the waiter saw the patched clothes on their body, he impatiently swept the dust in their direction and shouted with a disdainful look, "Leave, leave, leave. Is this a place that people like you can come? Even if you want to beg for food, you should find a better time. Hurry up and leave." It was the first time that Yu Xiaoxiao encountered a situation where someone had called her a beggar. A sense of rage rose within the depth of her heart. However, she endured and suppressed her emotions. On the principle that harmony makes money, she squeezed out a smile. "Hey, young brother, is your manager around? I have some fresh seafood here. I was wondering if your restaurant would be interested in buying them." That waiter looked up and swept a gaze at the ceramic jar within her hands. He had a look of contempt as he said, "Fulin Restaurant's seafoods are all delivered by a fixed fisherman. With your poor appearance, would you even have any high-quality goods? Just scram. Why would our manager waste his time to see a filthy little tramp like you? Why are you swearing at us?" Yu Heng frowned and stepped forward to reason with him. The waiter threw the broom in his hands, clasped his waist, and hollered, "So what if I'm swearing at you? Did you filthy beggars want to scam money? You even wanted to see our manager. Who do you think you are? Why is it so nosy in the morning?" Yu Xiaoxiao was about to explode in rage when a middle-aged man, who looked like a shopkeeper, came out of the main entrance and scolded. The waiter instantly changed his attitude and grinned flatteringly, "Manager Lu. This underling was sending away these beggars. You're a beggar. Manager Lu, I have several fresh and big abalones here. Would your restaurant be interested in buying them?" Yu Xiaoxiao gave the waiter a fierce glare, but she didn't continue to argue with him and directed her inquiry to Manager Lu. Manager Lu looked at the siblings, but he didn't really take them seriously. "Oh, abalones. If they are of good quality, then we'll take them." Yu Xiaoxiao walked forward with the earthen jar and said, "These are first-class abalones, with each being over 5 inches in length. Would you like to have a look?" On the street, a young man in an exquisite brocade robe immediately pulled on the reins of his horse upon hearing her words. Abalones that were over 5 inches in length. If it was true, then they were certainly abalones of the highest quality. County Magistrate Wu was holding his birthday banquet at Junshou Restaurant this afternoon. Weren't they just missing an impressive main course? On the other side, Manager Lu had already checked the goods and was inwardly stunned by the quality of the abalones. He came up with a plan within his heart and said to the siblings, "You're troubling me, this manager, just for these few abalones. All right, since you guys seem to be in a difficult circumstance, I'll make an exception and take these abalones for 800 copper coins." 800 copper coins. Yu Xiaoxiao and Yu Heng looked at each other, then she pursed her lips and snatched the earthen jar with the abalones back from Manager Lu's hands. "Manager Lu, do you really take us as beggars? What do you mean by that?" Manager Lu looked like a crafty old scoundrel as he twirled his beard and sneered, "With the quality of these abalones, my offer of 800 copper coins was already quite a lot. If you can sell them for 600 copper coins elsewhere, then that just means you're a skilled seller." When Yu Xiaoxiao saw his firm expression, a sense of uncertainty emerged within the heart. She doesn't know the market price for abalones. She couldn't help but shift her gaze towards Yu Hang. Yu Hang was completely unaffected by Manager Lu. He gave his youngest sister a soothing smile and said, "Business is all about mutual consensus. Since we aren't satisfied with Manager Lu's offer, then we should excuse ourselves." Manager Lu had originally thought that these two children would be easily fooled. He had planned to coax and scare them into selling the abalones at the lowest price possible. However, they didn't fall for his tricks. They directly turned around to leave without making any unnecessary comments. He felt somewhat anxious inwardly, so he hastily stopped them by saying, "You guys should consider carefully. Once you pass up this offer, you won't be able to find a better deal. Who would dare to accept goods that our Fulin restaurant had rejected?" Ha! A laughter that carried a slight sense of childishness sounded. "Manager Lu, you're speaking in such an imposing manner. When did your Fulin restaurant become the overlord of this street?" Manager Lu abruptly raised his head, narrowed his eyes, and replied with a smirk, "I was wondering who it was." So, it turned out to be Junsho Restaurant's third young master. "What, is Junsho Restaurant trying to interfere with our Fulin restaurant's matters now?" "Interfering with your matters? This young master doesn't have that much free time. I'll just leave that for your own master to worry about." Junsho Restaurant's third young master, Joe Zixu, smiled and said, "I just can't stand seeing people, on the pretense of doing honest business with all customers, taking advantage of others and forcing them to their precious seafoods at a lowered price." Manager Lu noticed that a crowd was forming and knew that he shouldn't continue to argue with him. Thus, he turned towards the siblings and said, "You two come in first. I'll definitely offer you an appropriate price. It's probably a price that only you will be satisfied with." A faintly indifferent smile emerged on third young master Joe's handsome and somewhat tender-looking face. Tanggu Town is located near the sea. Therefore, most of the locals are familiar with determining the quality and market price of marine products. "Little sister, would you please show everyone the abalones that you're holding? Let us see if our Fulin restaurant, who does honest and fair business, gave a fair price." Most of the bystanders didn't know what was going on. However, after listening to third young master Joe's words, was there anyone who still didn't understand? Fulin Restaurant's manager was bullying these two young siblings. He was using his powers to take advantages of them and forcing them sell their valuable marine goods at a low price. A large market was open today at Tanggu Town, so there were numerous fishermen from nearby fishing villages walking on the street. The most hated thing for these fishermen were dishonest merchants who maliciously demands a lower price. Thus, they volunteered in succession to be the siblings' examiner. Although Yu Hang has a quiet temperament, but he had a clear-headed understanding of the situation and had already made a decision in his mind. In the past, when he came to sell game with his father, he had heard about the rivalry between the new restaurant, Junsho Restaurant, and the old brand, Fulin Restaurant. This third young master Joe appeared to be helping them, but he was probably just taking this opportunity to attack Fulin Restaurant. This was a battle between two strong competitors, so was it really necessary to hurt innocent bystanders? Yu Hang held back his youngest sister's eagerness and politely said, "Business is about the mutual willingness between the two parties. It's natural for the seller to set a price and the buyer to bargain. Even if the deal doesn't work out, we can still maintain a benevolent relationship. We have nothing more to say since Manager Lu didn't like our goods. Please excuse us." As he spoke, he bowed with his hands clasped together and pulled Yu Xiaosao out of the crowd. Manager Lu was already fuming with anger due to third young master Joe's taunting, but he knew that it wasn't wise to keep thinking about taking those high-quality abalones. Thus, he used this opportunity to get himself out of this awkward situation. With a toss of his sleeves, he snorted and entered the restaurant. However, he broke out in cold sweat inwardly. Junsho Restaurant was a new restaurant that had only been opened for less than a year. It was backed by the Zhou family, who were one of the four major merchants within the entire empire. The Zhou family's ancestral home just happened to be in Tanggu Town, so Fulin Restaurant wasn't in a dominant position. Nevertheless, Fulin Restaurant was still an established restaurant. They still had several famous specialty dishes in their restaurant and a group of loyal customers. However, these past 2 months, the Zhou family's third young master had returned to his ancestral home. He had mysteriously obtained several new dishes that really suited the county magistrate's appetite, and also attracted many of Fu Lin restaurant's customers. His master was already unsatisfied with him due to that matter. If he also earned the reputation of being a bully today, then he'll probably be dismissed from his position as the manager of Fu Lin restaurant. Manager Lu alerted himself inwardly. Although he regretted not being able to obtain those precious abalones, he also didn't dare to use any devious schemes anymore. Eldest brother, why didn't we take this chance to teach that snob manager Lu a lesson? Yu Xiaoxiao was still aggrieved about that matter and angrily asked while shaking her small fist. Yu Heng looked at his youngest sister's puffed-up face, which had very lively expression. He couldn't resist pinching her little face and replied with a smile, Fu Lin restaurant was backed up by people from the government office. Ordinary citizens shouldn't fight with government officials. If we seriously offend Manager Lu, then it would be difficult for us to stay in this town in the future. Yu Xiaoxiao was stunned. As a modern-day citizen who was born under the red flag and raised in the spring breeze, it was her first time being taught that people are classified based on their wealth and status. Thus, various feelings surged into her heart. Yu Heng noticed that his youngest sister had stopped walking and had dazed expression on her face. He thought she was frightened, so he hastily comforted her, youngest sister, don't be afraid. As long as we do the right things, then those rich people and government officials wouldn't be able to harm us. Father said that our emperor was a good ruler, who was intelligent and had fair judgment. The officials under his rule were still mostly fair and honest. A good example would be the county magistrate of Tanggu town. He was well known as an upright magistrate. Yu Xiaoxiao collected her composure. In the novels and television, there were many wealthy people and officials who looked down on the common citizens in ancient times. Hence, she inwardly reminded herself to keep a low profile in the future. Eldest brother, is our emperor really that powerful? He can make all those high-ranking officials obediently submit to his ruling. Yu Xiaoxiao had just recently transmigrated here, so she still didn't know what dynasty she was in. Shish! Yu Heng almost reached out to cover her mouth. What does she mean by obediently submit to his ruling? Fortunately, they were in Tanggu town, a small coastal town. If they were in the capital, which was full of fourth-rank officials walking on the streets, they would have been convicted of irreverence. Chortle. Just when Yu Heng felt inwardly glad that no one had heard their conversation, he heard a young man's distinctive laughter. When the siblings turned their heads, they saw the young master in refined clothes who they met earlier. He was currently pulling his horse and walking behind them. Yu Heng's face immediately turned pale. He doesn't know if this noble young master had heard his youngest sister's disrespectful words. He gritted his teeth, walked towards him, and said, "Thank you so much for speaking up for us earlier." Third young master Zhou dusted off the lapels of his clothes and laughed. Actually, I wasn't purely speaking up for you guys. As Junshou Restaurant's young boss, I wouldn't miss out on any chance to attack Fu Lin Restaurant. It was a pity. When Yu Xiaoxiao heard that this young man was the young boss of Junshou Restaurant, she looked out from behind her elder brother with a bright smile. You're the young boss of Junshou Restaurant. Can you make decisions? Yu Heng knew his youngest sister's intentions, so he quietly pulled on her sleeve. There was a slight trace of arrogance that was typical to young people on third. Young Master Zhou's handsome face. Junshou Restaurant was specially gifted to me by my family so that I can use it as a form of training. Thus, I naturally have the rights to make decisions. They had unknowingly arrived at the street where Junshou Restaurant was located. Junshou Restaurant's tall and magnificent entrance could be seen from afar. Yu Xiaoxiao was completely speechless. This restaurant was comparable to a 5-star hotel, but the owner had actually given it to a young child to use as training. This Zhou family was seriously rich. Third young master, why did you come at this time? Junshou Restaurant's manager was a competent assistant that the master of the Zhou family provided for his son. The master of the Zhou family had 3 sons. When they reached a certain age, they began working to gain experience under one of the family's businesses. However, the youngest son chose to return to their ancestral home and build a new restaurant. Even his 2 older brothers didn't have such courage. Junshou Restaurant had very few customers a year ago, but it was difficult to even find a seat nowadays. Thus, the manager sincerely acknowledged his young boss. He was determined to follow the third young master and pursue a successful career with him. Third young master Zhou was rather satisfied with this capable and loyal manager. The first step of success for members of the Zhou family was to be able to win the loyalties of the people around them. This was something that he had already achieved. He will do even better in the future. He will let those people watch as he becomes successful. Manager Zhang, how are the preparations for County Magistrate Wu's birthday banquet? Everything's ready and here's the menu. Third young master, can you check if there's anything that needs to be taken out? Manager Zhang personally held the birthday banquet's menu for third young master Zhou to look over. County Magistrate Wu had always placed great emphasis on his reputation as a government official. This banquet wasn't intended to be extravagant and was just a simple family dinner. Therefore, there were 10 people in attendance at most. County Magistrate Wu was born in an aristocratic family, which had served as officials for generations. Moreover, his wife was the daughter of Marquis Zhongyi. Thus, they wouldn't be impressed by ordinary dishes. County Magistrate Wu was a major reason for Junshou Restaurant's success in Tanggu Town, so they must serve him well. The dishes for the banquet were decided after Zhou Zixu had a thorough discussion with the kitchen. Most of them were specialty dishes and popular dishes of the restaurant. However, third young master Zhou was still unsatisfied with the menu. He felt that it was still missing a top-notch dish that was high-end and elegant. I need to discuss business with these siblings, so prepare a quiet place for us. Third young master Zhou didn't take the menu and instructed the manager. After that, he turned around to greet Yu Heng and his sister. Discuss business. With these two, Manager Zhang examined the young siblings, who were dressed in old and shabby clothes. There wasn't any contempt within his eyes, just curiosity. These two little fellows had attracted his young master's attention. What was so special about them? While Yu Xiaosao followed behind third young master Zhou, she curiously looked at Junshou Restaurant's furnishing. It was worthy of being a rising star who competed with the established Fulin restaurant. There was an expected majestic atmosphere in all aspects of the restaurant, but the details of the decor also made people feel warm and comfortable. Xiaosao gasped in admiration inwardly, but her every move had fallen into the eyes of third young master Zhou. These siblings had aroused his interest. Although the older brother was young, he could make rational choices and quick decisions. The younger sister was in the grand and upscale Junshou restaurant, but there was only curiosity and admiration in her eyes, without any trace of unease and timidity. Were they not born in a poor fisherman's family, but actually hiding a secret? Zhou Zixu felt somewhat uncertain in his mind. Seeing the wariness within Yu Heng's eyes, he knew that Yu Heng was still being cautious due to the unintentional remark the little girl made earlier. Zhou Zixu smiled and said, "Our great Ming dynasty is different from the previous dynasty's belief that the people's speech needs to be suppressed like the flood. Our current emperor is especially open-minded and advocates for freedom of speech. Your younger sister didn't say anything wrong. His Majesty is an excellent ruler, so how was she being disrespectful? Advocates for freedom of speech." Yu Xiaosao felt that it was rather strange to hear this phrase from someone from the ancient times. However, she finally found out that she was in the great Ming dynasty. In her impression, people of the Ming dynasty were rather fortunate in terms of eating. Numerous ingredients and seasonings had been imported from abroad. As an expert in how could she go without any of these? As Zhongwen Emperor, Zhu Yunwen, in power now, Yu Xiaosao didn't filter her mouth and carelessly blurted out her knowledge of history. However, as soon as she spoke, she knew that she was in trouble. In ancient times, if she directly called out the emperor's name, would she be beheaded? Zhou Zixu looked at her and spoke with a slightly surprised tone. It is currently the reign of Zhongwen, but who's Zhu Yunwen? Yu Xiaosao carefully observed third young master Zhou's expression and determined that her little life was probably safe. Thus, she cautiously asked, "Isn't it currently the reign of the second emperor of the Ming dynasty?" At the fishing village, she had vaguely heard that the current emperor was the second emperor of this dynasty. The second emperor of the Ming dynasty was Zhu Yunwen. Did she make a mistake with history? You're right. The first emperor of the dynasty passed the imperial throne to his grandson and went on a sightseeing trip. All this had already been compiled into a storytelling and spread throughout the entire great Ming dynasty. However, though our emperor is also surnamed Zhu, his name isn't Zhu Yunwen. The personal name of our respected Zhongwen Emperor is Junfan. The personal name of the emperor of the great Ming dynasty wasn't necessarily a taboo. Zhongwen Emperor had personally set an example for freedom of speech. It was said that a minister had been overly agitated during court and directly called out the emperor's name. Not only did the emperor not blame him, but he also called him, comparable to Wei Zheng, for his courage to give direct criticism. Zhu Junfan. Was there an emperor during the Ming dynasty called Zhu Junfan? I don't think so. The first emperor of the Ming dynasty passed his position to his grandson, but that grandson wasn't Zhu Yunwen. Was this great Ming dynasty the same as the Ming dynasty recorded in history? The personal name of the founder of the Ming dynasty, Yu Shaoxiao bravely continued to ask. The founder of the dynasty was Zhu Huaiyang. He had conquered the world with his military force and established the great Ming dynasty, which is well known throughout the world. Are you really a citizen of the great Ming dynasty? How can you not even know this? Zhou Zixu looked at her with disbelief, as if she was an alien. Yu Heng immediately helped his younger sister explain, my youngest sister had been sick and bedridden ever since. She was young. She had only begun to gradually recover recently. Zhou Zixu's gaze lingered on Yu Shaoxiao's pale face. He slightly nodded and said, it seems like little sister Yu is quite interested in the great Ming dynasty, so I'll be a good person and tell you about it. Third young master Zhou's next words was a major shock to Yu Shaoxiao. Although the Yuan dynasty was also overthrown by the Ming dynasty and the emperor's surname was also Zhu, but this Ming dynasty wasn't the same as the Ming dynasty in history that she was familiar with. It wasn't Zhu Yuanzhong who overthrew the last emperor of the Yuan dynasty, but the retired emperor, Zhu Huaiyang. The retired emperor had lived in poverty and was allegedly an unsuccessful person in his youth. However, when he was 22 years old, he suddenly became an entirely different person. Zhu Huaiyang, who was originally timid and cowardly, raised a rebellion under the tyranny of the Yuan dynasty. He was a brilliant strategist with outstanding abilities, so he quickly became the leader of the rebels and achieved glorious results on the battlefield. In less than 10 years, he had subverted the rule of the Yuan dynasty and established the great Ming dynasty. Afterwards, it took nearly 10 years to calm the chaos within the country that was caused by the war. They also had to drive other hostile nations around them far away from the borders, beating them until they didn't dare to fight back again. The retired emperor, Zhu Huaiyang, could be regarded as a military genius who only appeared once in a century. However, his ability to govern the country was mediocre. At the beginning of the establishment of the new dynasty, there were endless battles and chaos. As a result, there was a loss of crops and lack of farmland, which caused famine and a price inflation for grain. People lived in misery and poverty. The current emperor was the eldest legitimate grandson of the first emperor. He was a young genius, who had led a group of boatmen to build ships for ocean voyages at the age of 12. He also personally went on a trip and brought back crops like chili peppers, sweet potatoes, and peanuts. Furthermore, he exported tea, porcelain, and silk to the New World for trade with the native people. The high-yielding sweet potatoes were able to provide the war-weary citizens with food to fill their stomachs. The common people merely strived for survival, so when a source of food was guaranteed, society gradually stabilized. After the current emperor came of age at 20 years old, the first emperor retired from his position and passed the imperial throne to him. After that, the retired emperor lived a leisurely life of traveling and sightseeing. After Zhongwen Emperor ascended the throne, a series of reforms were carried out to reduce taxes, encourage farming and sericulture, and support the development of industry and commerce. In just 5 years, he was able to organize and keep the country in good order. It was historically recorded as the rule of heaven. Yu Shaoxiao was confused. Did she transmigrate back in time or to another world with a similar history? What was the point in being bothered by this? Since she was already here, she should just go with the flow. First, she needed to solve the problem of obtaining enough food to eat and warm clothing to wear. Yu Shaoxiao turned her gaze towards the handsome young boy, Zhou Zixu. This gullible little sheep might be the first step to improve her current living conditions. Although they were in the middle of the 3 hottest days of summer, third young Master Zhou suddenly felt a gust of cold air and the hairs on his arms stood up. He inwardly wondered, feeling chilly even when there was a scorching sun in the sky. Did I catch a cold? That, young Master Joe, you're in charge of Junsho restaurant, right? Do you want these abalones? Yu Xiaosao asked candidly. While Zhou Zixu was telling them about the history, he had pretended to unintentionally glance at the earthenware jar within her hands several times. He had been waiting for the right time to ask about it, so he hastily replied, if they're high-quality abalones, then our Junsho restaurant will definitely offer you a reasonable price. Can I take a look first? The abalones that Yu Hai caught this time were indeed rare. Moreover, they seemed to have grown after being nourished by the mystic stone water overnight. They appeared to be even more fresh and juicy. Zhou Zixu wasn't very knowledgeable about seafood, so he invited manager Zhang and head chef Wang over. After they saw the abalones, they praised them fervently. Head chef Wang had been cooking seafood for nearly 30 years. Such big and fresh abalones were comparable to a king abalone, which he had seen only 5 years ago after a stroke of luck. Moreover, the abalones were all about the same size and abnormally plump. Junsho restaurant will take these abalones. Zhou Zixu decisively said, how much do you want? Just state a price. Based on manager Yang's and head chef Wang's eyes and expressions, Yu Xiaosao already knew that these abalones were very rare. After a moment of deliberation, she said, we have 9 abalones. It costs 1 tael for each abalone. No bargaining. Yu Heng widened his eyes in shock as he looked at his youngest sister. 1 tael for each abalone, then that would be 9 taels. He had originally thought that 2 or 3 taels would be the most that they could earn from selling the abalones. But 9 taels. His youngest sister had actually dared to state this price. Manager Zhang furrowed his brows slightly. It was understandable for abalones to be expensive in the capital and some inland regions, since scarcity makes things valuable. However, Tanggu Town was a small coastal town that didn't lack seafood. Thus, it was rare to see the price of 1 tael per abalone. When he was about to start bargaining for a lower price, his young boss had already swiftly made a decision. He readily agreed with a wave of his hand, Manager Zhang, pay. Head chef Wang had already eagerly carried the earthen jar filled with abalones away. For a renowned chef, what else would be more pleasing than obtaining good ingredients? Manager Zhang didn't say anything more and took out 2 small ingots, which were worth 5 taels each. He muttered inwardly, third young Master Joe doesn't manage the household expenses, so he doesn't know the cost of living. 1 tael for 1 abalone. It's impossible to find such a price within the entire Tanggu town. He's still too young. Manager Zhang, we don't have any change. Yu Heng looked at the shiny ingots on the table. He secretly gulped his saliva and didn't dare reach out his hand to take them. Zhou Zixu was in a good mood since he worked out the main dish for the banquet in the afternoon. He directly said, keep the change. If your family has any good seafood in the future, remember to send them to Junsho restaurant first. We can negotiate a good price. Yu Xiaosao smiled until her eyes turned a crescent-shaped. She happily took the 2 ingots and said, no problem. Our Yu family are skilled fishermen. In the future, if we catch things like shark fins and sea cucumbers, we'll definitely send them to Junsho restaurant first. Yu family. Is it Yu Dahai's family from Dongshan village? Manager Zhang had heard the rumors about Yu Hai hunting sharks. For a large restaurant, all sorts of delicacies were equally difficult to find. It seems like third young master has a keen eye for people. If they can have a good relationship with the Yu family, then they wouldn't suffer any losses either. Yu Heng just recovered from the unbelievable shock. He took a deep breath, then gently exhaled. 10 taels. That was several months of income for their family. After Yu Heng finally steadied his emotions, he answered Manager Yang's question, yes, Yu Hai is my father. He caught these abalones when he dived under the reefs. However, marine treasures like shark fin and sea cucumbers aren't as easy to obtain. Don't listen to my youngest sister's reckless remark. They're difficult to obtain, but not impossible. It's fine as long as you do as your younger sister promised and think of Junsho restaurant first when you have good seafood, especially the valuable ones. Zhou Zixu patted his shoulder and said with a smile. Yu Xiaosao smiled brightly like a flower, while fiddling with the 2 ingots, that's right. I'll tell my father when we get back. Third young Master Joe, thanks a lot. Zhou Zixu smiled even more widely when he saw that the young girl's expression. She looked like a money grubber who just hadn't bitten down on the ingots yet. The young girl suddenly raised her head and asked Manager Zhang with a stern expression, "Manager Zhang, can you help me change these ingots to silver bits?" Manager Zhang felt that this little girl was rather interesting, so he purposely teased her, "Are you sure? If I change them to silver bits for you, then I'll only give you 9 taels." Yu Xiaoxiao didn't mind this since the price she had requested was 9 taels. The extra tael was an unexpected bonus. However, it would be inconvenient if they didn't change them to silver bits. She and Yu Heng were both children dressed in shabby clothes. If they go shopping on the streets with 2 small ingots, they would obviously attract thieves. 9 taels, so be it. If it's not too troublesome, it would be best if you can also change some into copper coins. They could have purchased so much white rice and flour with 1 tael, so Yu Heng was somewhat bewildered that Yu Xiaoxiao had given up on it so easily. Manager Zhang took the silver ingots from them with a smile and left. A few moments later, he came back out. One hand held a plain purse made of rough burlap and the other had a couple strings of copper coins. "This bag holds about 4½ taels worth of silver bits. I changed the rest into these strings of copper cash." The restaurant manager even warned them, "Be careful with how you store this money. You don't want any thieves to get their eyes onto this." "Thank you, Manager Zhang." Yu Xiaoxiao as she carefully placed the pouch full of silver into her clothing. She then divided the strings of copper coins evenly between her and her older brother in preparation for their upcoming shopping trip. Before the 2 siblings left, the young girl went into the restaurant's back kitchen to retrieve their old and damaged ceramic pot. At the same moment, a shipment of oysters had come in. The sight of the pails and pails of fresh seafood flowing into the kitchen astonished her. "Wow," she exclaimed in awe, "Junshou restaurant must be doing really well. Are you really able to sell all of these oysters out in one day?" Head chef Wang laughed ruefully. "Unfortunately, oysters aren't exactly a rare delicacy for a coastal town like us. How is it possible for us to sell this many oysters in one day? It must be third young master buying more than we need again. These darned creatures are hard to keep alive outside of the sea, and it's hot right now so we can't let them sit for too long. I guess I'll have to find someone to turn most of them into dried goods." Zhou Zixu had also followed the 2 children into the kitchen. After seeing the bunch of oysters all piled in the room, he knew he had bought too many. Feeling awkward, he rubbed his nose sheepishly. Said Yu Xiaoxiao. "I'll help you guys out since third young master Zhou was so generous. Is there any sugar and cooking wine in here?" The little girl rolled up her sleeves as if she was about to do some hard work. Zhou Zixu glanced at her slender and weak-looking arms before he quickly replied, "Of course we do. What kind of restaurant would we be if we didn't have such basic ingredients? What are you planning to do with these oysters?" Yu Xiaoxiao beamed a smile at him but decided to keep him in suspense. "You'll know once I'm done. Take it as my present to you, young master." The 2 older men exchanged a perplexed look. Just what was the little girl up to? They still had some spare time before the county magistrate's banquet, so they had enough time to satisfy their curiosity. In her previous life, her younger brother loved to eat food flavored with oyster sauce. However, the oyster sauce sold at the supermarket all had a bunch of additives in them. In an effort to avoid harming his health, she found a recipe online and started to make her own oyster sauce at home. After experimenting and tinkering with the recipe for a long time, she finally developed a recipe that was not only delicious but also more healthy. Her brother loved the homemade sauce and thought that it tasted more original and savory than the versions from the store. The only flaw was that it spoiled more quickly than the manufactured sauces. But it was to be expected. After all, she never added any preservatives to it. With a demeanor full of confidence, Yu Xiaoxiao directed the kitchen staff to start shucking all of the oysters and to leave the meat in a separate wooden cask. She surveyed the kitchen and grabbed the largest pot she could find. She swiftly calculated the ratio, then poured an appropriate amount of water into the pot to boil. Once the water started to boil, Yu Xiaoxiao poured in all of the oyster meat and started to stir the pot vigorously with a ladle. The cask that held the oysters had some essence left at the bottom. This leftover liquid actually held a lot of the oysters' savory flavor, so she added all of it into the hot pot without a second thought. It would be a pity to waste something that could enhance the taste and increase the output of the sauce. Hey you, come help me stir this pot. Yu Xiaoxiao's fragile body was still too weak to work for too long. Let me do it instead. Head Chef Wang exclaimed as he squeezed his fat butt into the crowd and pushed the earmarked kitchen staff aside. Should I continue stirring in one direction? Head Chef Wang had worked as a chef for over 10 years and was passionate about uncovering new methods and recipes. Although it was a little shameful to steal skills from other people, this particular person didn't seem to be guarding her methods. How could he let such a prime opportunity pass him? Yu Xiaoxiao nodded absent-mindedly as she silently calculated out the remaining time. The oysters needed to simmer for another 20 to 30 minutes to maximize flavor extraction. After that, the meat needed to be separated out to allow the rest of the sauce to develop. However, the leftover oyster meat could still be cooked in other dishes or set out in the sun to dry for later. Not one bit needed to be wasted. After the allotted time finished, Yu Xiaoxiao strained the leftover meat and other solids from the finished oyster essence. She poured some oil into a clean pot to coat the inside to prevent substances from sticking to it. The oyster essence was then added to the vessel along with some fresh water. The contents were set on the fire to stew again. During this second process, Yu Xiaoxiao added some sugar, cooking wine, and some other seasonings while the sauce simmered on low heat. Time passed as she let the ingredients cook and meld together. It was almost lunchtime before she finally declared that it was ready. The finished oyster sauce was dark in color and had a glossy sheen. The whole kitchen was filled with its savory fragrance. Head Chef Wang impatiently sampled a taste of the sauce and his eyes opened wide in shock. This is incredible. How could something have such a dense yet savory taste? It is so full of flavor but it doesn't seem overwhelming. Yu Xiaoxiao also took a taste before smiling. It still lacks a couple of key ingredients that would make it more delicious. Still, this sauce is still pretty good. It retains the original flavor from the oysters. Zhou Zixu and manager Zhang followed in trying the sauce out. What kind of sauce is this? Can it be added to cooked meats and vegetables? Yu Xiaoxiao nodded in assent. This is called oyster sauce. Oyster sauce is also known as the essence of the sea. Using it while cooking can increase the overall savoriness and tastiness of a dish. She looked around the kitchen and then pointed at a bunch of green-leafed vegetables. Let me make some simmered green vegetables, one with this. This is one of my specialties. Head Chef Wang enthusiastically started washing the vegetables himself. In the meantime, Yu Xiaoxiao set another pot full of water on the fire and let it come to a boil. After quickly blanching the cleaned greens in the water, she set the cooked vegetables onto a serving plate and drizzled some oyster sauce and sesame oil on top. The dish was finished. She glanced up at everyone in the kitchen and hinted at them to take a taste. "Is this already finished?" asked someone incredulously. The rest of the people in the room looked at her in dismay. Wasn't this just boiled green vegetables? On the other hand, Head Chef Wang had a thoughtful expression on his face. From his culinary experience, he knew that the more simple a dish was, the more it tested a chef's capabilities. He grabbed a pair of chopsticks and used them to bring a single stem to his mouth. The taste of the savory oyster sauce and fresh flavor of the vegetable melded perfectly together. It was something that he had never tasted before, but it was divine to his senses. The blissful expression on Head Chef Wang's face elicited Zhou Zixu's curiosity. How could someone like the head chef, who had likely eaten many delicious dishes, be so infatuated with something like this? It was just some steamed vegetables with some sauce on top. After contemplating for another second, the young master finally decided to try it himself. He also picked up one stalk and carefully placed it into his mouth. As someone who grew up in a rich family, he naturally loved to eat meat more than plain vegetables. His mother had gone through a lot of effort throughout the years to get him to eat some vegetables at his meals. The chef of his family had a practiced hand in cooking vegetables. In fact, many of the nobles and aristocrats had asked one time or another for his family to sell this chef to them. All of the offers had been gracefully declined. However, all of those exquisite dishes made by high-class cooks could not even be compared to this simple dish made by this little girl. The secret ingredient was obvious in this case. Zhou Zixu and Head Chef Wang looked at each other. Their thoughts and hearts were linked as one in what their next step to be. The light of greed started to shine in their eyes. Young miss from the Yu family, do you plan on selling your method? Third young master Joe and head chef Wong asked at same time. Are you two asking about the recipe for the oyster sauce? What do you mean by selling it? I didn't hide anything when I made it earlier. If there are any parts that are confusing, feel free to ask me. Yu Xiaoxiao had never intended to sell her recipe for money. It was more important for her to build some good karma and connections. Zhou Zixu not only was the true owner of the best restaurant in Tanggu Town but was also the young master of one of the four great merchant families of the country, the Zhou family. In the future, it was likely she would need a couple of favors from him. It was better to leave a good impression now than to be greedy. The more friends she had, the more options she had in the future. Head chef Wong had grown up in a family who was well known for producing culinary talents and knew firsthand just how cutthroat the culinary world was. In his experience, all famous chefs who had signature dishes guarded and hoarded their recipes zealously. However, this particular little girl in front of him had no qualms in sharing her secrets. The older man rubbed his hands sheepishly before he said, "Miss Yu, might it be a good idea to discuss this with your parents before you make a final decision?" No need to ask them. This recipe was personally developed by me, no one else at home knows about it. If you don't believe, ask my older brother right now. Yu Xiaoxiao waved her hand dismissively at the head chef's suggestion. Once third young master Zhou confirmed her statement with Yu Hang, he thought for a bit before making his final decision. All right, then I will take your generous gift graciously. In the future, if you run into any trouble, feel free to come to the Zhou family residence to find me. Yu Xiaoxiao grinned in delight and thought, whippersnapper, I was just waiting for those words. Oh right, since the weather is hot now, make sure to store any leftover oyster sauce in the ice house. It can't be held for more than a month before it goes bad. After leaving her last piece of advice to the two men, she rubbed the pouch containing her hard-earned money and prepared to leave. Don't worry. Although it looks like we have a lot of oyster sauce, we have many customers here at Junshou Restaurant. I'd be surprised if this even lasted a week. Head chef Wong carefully poured the sauce into a bottle and cradled it like it was a world treasure before he reluctantly set it down again. At the same time, the flow of customers into Junshou Restaurant started to increase, and the back kitchen started to bustle with activity. Zhou Zixu ordered the restaurant staff to add oyster-seasoned green vegetables to County Magistrate Wu's banquet menu. Head chef Wong took out the abalone and had a pensive look on his face. He needed to figure out the best way to serve this high-quality abalone to awe and impress the magistrate's guests. Yu Xiaoxiao couldn't help but give him a suggestion. You could try making abalone with garlic sauce 1. If the guests don't like the taste of garlic, you can switch it out for the oyster sauce instead. The sauce can elevate the intrinsic flavor of the abalone. But take your time in deciding, head chef Wong. Under the escort of third young master Zhou and manager Zhang, the two siblings finally left Junshou Restaurant. Coincidentally, the magistrate's son had come over directly after finishing school and saw the brother-sister pair leave. Third young master Zhou was not normally a humble person, so seeing him treat a couple of children who were dressed like street urchins so politely was out of the ordinary. The young man couldn't help but ask incredulously, "Third young master Zhou, what are the identities of these two children? They must be extraordinary in order to catch your eye." Zhou Zixu clasped his two hands together and perfunctorily greeted him. He quickly reverted back to his usual dandy self. "Brother Wu, I see that school must have let out early today. Come in, come in. I just had a new shipment of clouds and mists tea come in. This batch has a strong fragrance and has the color of fresh dew. Very hard to find now." Young Master Wu only had one elegant hobby, drinking and comparing teas. Once he heard Junshou Restaurant had received a rare batch, all curious thoughts about the odd sibling pair went straight out of his mind. He followed Zhou Zixu into a private room. "Let's go shopping, eldest brother. Whatever you want to eat is on me today." Now that Yu Xiaoxiao had money in her hands, she felt more confident. Her back was ramrod straight as she strode imposingly down the road. Yu Hang flicked her forehead teasingly but then lowered his voice before he said, "We're still one household right now. Any money we earn has to be handed over. If grandmother finds out we have so much silver now, she definitely would not be happy. I feel like it's better that we..." Yu Xiaoxiao quickly brought her hands up to protect the purse hidden in her clothes. Her eyes glinted with annoyance. Is the money that our dad brings home not enough? He's the one keeping the whole family afloat, including our uncle who's studying in the town. Let the adults find ways to keep the family running. They don't need to know about this little extra income that we earned. Yu Hang opened his mouth to say something, but his sister quickly interrupted him. Hand it over, hand it over. You guys are just encouraging grandmother's behavior. Just think about how much money has father given to them, and how much of that money comes back to us. You better not tell anyone about the money we made today, otherwise you're not my older brother anymore. Seeing that Yu Xiaoxiao was adamant, Yu Hang decided it was useless to try to change her mind. Instead, he reminded her, then make sure you hide the money well. You can't let grandmother or the other family members find out. Don't worry so much about the stuff I'm in charge of. Yu Xiaoxiao slapped her chest to show Yu Hang she had everything handled. Her spirits were up now that she had money in hand. She gleefully pulled her brother along to go shopping for the first time. As the two of them strolled, Yu Xiaoxiao checked out all of the prices and stored them for future use. At the grain shop, millet, potato starch, and maize were all 2 copper coins a caddy. White flour was 5 copper coins a caddy. Northern lands didn't plant a lot of rice, so it was 7 copper coins a caddy. The price of a caddy of high-quality pork 20 copper coins, while one single live chicken was 40 copper coins. Although the imperial court had stabilized prices recently, peace had only recently come to the empire. Most commoners lived similar lives to the fishermen in Dongshan village, eking out in poverty day by day. The more she understood the circumstances of this world, the more Yu Xiaoxiao missed her old world. Modern life was still better. Even though her childhood was not easy, it still wasn't as bad the lives most people led here. After living as the oldest sister in her past life, she had already gotten used to handling all of the responsibilities. Her mind whirled as she started to come up with ideas to get rich. She needed more money in order to help her family live a better life. One where they weren't always worrying about their next meal. A nearby hawker cried out, "Big meat buns too. Delicious and tasty meat buns." The sound of his harsh voice neatly cut through her thoughts. Grumble, grumble. Their stomachs groaned and yelled at thought of food. They both had gotten up early that morning, and neither of them had eaten anything before setting out. Yu Xiaoxiao rubbed her shriveled tummy as the smell of the meat buns floated into her nose. She waved a fist in the air and said, "Let's go and eat some meat buns. Give us 4 big meat buns and 2 bowls of egg drop soup 3. After getting their food, Yu Xiaoxiao walked over to a low table at the side of the road and made sure to call her brother over to eat food. Although they couldn't afford to eat at a high-class restaurant, they could still eat as much they wanted from the food stalls. Yu Hang had taken trips with his dad before to town. On those trips, neither of them would spend a single copper coin out of frugalness. His little sister, on the other hand, had no qualms on spending a handful of coins in one transaction. The amount of money she spent on their meal was almost enough to buy 2 caddies of white rice and 3 caddies of white flour. I'll just eat 3 plain buns and drink some water instead, said Yu Hang after looking at all of the prices. He settled on spending just 1 copper coin for his meal. Yu Xiaoxiao knew her brother had thriftiness down to his bones. She silently counted out 12 copper coins and handed it to the hawker selling breakfast foods. The merchant cleverly took out 4 stuffed buns and had his wife ladle out 2 steaming bowls of soup up. Don't make a fuss, we already bought the food, so just eat it now. Yu Xiaoxiao grabbed one of the hot buns and thrust it into Yu Hang's hands. She opened her mouth wide and sank her teeth into another bun. These ancient people knew how to make some delicious meat buns. The skins were appropriately thin and there was plenty of filling in the bun. Every bite had the satisfying, rich taste of meat. The savory flavor filled and melted in her mouth. Perhaps she was too hungry, but she thought that there was nothing more delicious in the world than these meat buns right here. She alternated between sips of soup and bites of pastry. Within minutes, Xiaoxiao had polished off 2 buns and her bowl of soup. Filled to satisfaction, she let out a happy little burp. So full now. In the past few days, she had never been able to eat as much as she did today. It was good to have money. This experience solidified her desire to save up her own private purse in the future. Although he was physically older, Yu Heng was still a 10-year-old child. After seeing his little sister eat so happily, he couldn't help but also take a bite. The rest was history after that first bite. Before he knew it, all of the food had disappeared into his little belly. He rubbed his bulging tummy sheepishly and grinned in embarrassment. This stall's meat buns are really too delicious. We need to buy some for mother, father, and little Shido too. Yu Xiaoxiao was not a stingy person and wanted to share her good fortune with her family. Don't worry, little brother, your older sister will always think of you when there's good food around. Aren't I a good sister? Yu Heng's cute face scrunched up in worry. I don't mind buying some for our parents, little sister, and little brother, but this can't get out to other people. If grandmother finds out, she'll definitely want to know where we got the money from. Wouldn't we be dead meat then? Yu Xiaoxiao glared at her brother. Are you stupid? Why would we let grandmother know? Can't we learn from eldest aunt's example? She eats food on the sly all the time. Their eldest aunt, Madame Li, never came back from her maiden home empty-handed. However, all of the food she brought back was hidden in her rooms. Only when no one was around would she surreptitiously take out some snacks and eat them with her son. Yu Xiaoxiao bought 10 more meat buns and had the hawker wrap them up carefully in oiled paper. The wrapped package was then stuffed into their battered ceramic pot. Earlier, they had placed some old rags on the top to hide their precious abalones. They also used the same tactic now to hide their forbidden pastries. By the time the two of them arrived at the city gate, they could see that Uncle Ma was already there, waiting for them. The older matron who sold vegetables was also there. Her face was lit up with happiness. Judging by the large empty basket next to the woman, it wasn't hard to see why. Xiaoxiao, hurry up. We're just waiting for you too. Uncle Ma stood up when he saw them and waved to the two siblings. What about the lady who was selling eggs? Yu Xiaoxiao inquired as she hopped onto the donkey cart. She's not here yet. The older lady who sold vegetables smiled. Oh, her. She sold off all of her eggs earlier and left already. She asked me to help her bring her basket back home. Xiaoxiao, what's in that pot of yours? It looks pretty heavy. Yu Xiaoxiao sighed dejectedly, a sad expression on her little face. My mother made some fermented soybean paste. We had wanted to see if we could sell them for a few copper coins and buy some coarse grains back home. But we couldn't even sell a copper coin's worth earlier. And now we're down the 4 copper coins that we used for the ride here. When the matron heard it was soybean paste, she lost interest in the contents of the pot. She comforted the little girl absent-mindedly and then leaned her body against the side of the wagon and dozed off. Yu Heng couldn't help but stare at his little sister when he heard her glibly lie between her teeth. Where did she learn to lie so easily? That's not good. When he got back home, he needed to remind his mother to raise her more carefully. Otherwise, his sister might grow up to be too crooked. When the two siblings arrived back to their village, they saw a familiar, tall figure standing on the road, waiting anxiously for them. Father, we're back. Yu Xiaoxiao balanced the heavy ceramic pot in her hand as she ran with a staggering gait towards Yu Hai. Yu Hai put down the game in his hands, effortlessly lifted his daughter up in the air, and faced his son with a stern look on his face. You're pretty brave, huh? You took your little sister out without a word to anyone, eh? 2 little kids running around without anyone to look out for you. What if you guys encountered some bad people? He then turned to his daughter and spoke in a softer tone. Cower, in the future, if you want to go into town, tell father. Father will bring you there. It's already past lunchtime, you must be hungry, right? Father made sure to leave 3 steamed rolls, 1 for you. You should eat them while they're still hot. Doting only on the daughter, he was truly a fool for his youngest daughter. Yu Xiaoxiao had a bashful expression on her face while being carried by her father. She wriggled out of her father's grasp and said, Older brother and I have already eaten in town. We ate 2 large meat buns. I'm so full now, father. I also bought some for you too. You should eat them while we walk. Yu Xiaoxiao knew her grandmother's miserly temperament. Since her father had steamed rolls for them to eat, it meant that he had to go hungry. This man woke up at the crack of dawn to go hunting in the mountains and later had to go into town to sell his game. It wasn't right for him to go hungry. Yu Xiaoxiao forced 3 pastries into her father's hands. She looked at the mangled and bloody game on the ground and felt her heart skip a beat. Father, I want to eat roasted pheasant. Is it possible to leave one of these for me? Hunting today went so-so. Yu Hai had only caught some small game, 2 Reeves's pheasants, 3 wild hares, and 2 plump nondescript wild birds. Yu Heng pulled gently at his sister's sleeves and whispered, "Grandmother already saw the game that father caught today. She always knows how much money these will go for. If he comes back with less money, all hell will break loose. Didn't we already eat some meat buns today? We'll eat some pheasant meat in the future." The congenial expression on Yu Hai's didn't change throughout the whole interaction between his 2 children. Leaving you a pheasant is not a problem. But your older brother is also right, Cower. After your latest illness, your stomach is still quite weak. So you shouldn't eat roasted pheasant right now. In a few days, once your body is all better, father will definitely leave you a nice, fat pheasant for you to eat. Yu Xiaoxiao was pretty sure that there was nothing wrong with her body now. But it was obvious that no one in her immediate family believed that. It looked like she still had to prove herself to them. Following that, the 2 siblings ran around the village, looking for their mother, Shaolian, and little brother. They soon discovered that their mother was at the creek washing the bedsheets. Shaolian had taken little Shido out to the foot of the West Mountains to pick up some firewood. No one lived at the foot of the West Mountains, and few people from the village went there normally. It was the perfect place, cough cough, for dividing out their secretly acquired meat buns. The 2 of them split to complete their mission. Yu Heng went to the river to find Madame Lu while Xiaoxiao took the ceramic pot with the pastries to the foot of the mountains. Mother, Xiaoxiao, you should come over and look yourself. A lot of other women from the village were washing their laundry at the bank of the stream. Yu Heng didn't dare to explain the situation clearly, and he also was too honest to come up with a good lie on the spot. The only thing he could do was to insinuate there was something wrong with his younger sister. When Madame Lu heard his half-finished sentence, she hurriedly got up. The sheet in her hands almost slipped out and drifted away into the creek. Yu Heng instantly felt guilty when he saw how worried she was. He tried to backtrack. "Mother, don't worry. Little sister is fine. You're not a doctor," Madame Lu retorted. "How would you know for sure your sister is okay? I need to see her myself. Auntie Futian, do you mind keeping an eye on these sheets for me? If I don't come back before you're done, could you do me a favor and bring them back for me?" Lu Muyun wiped her hands dry and then rushed after her son. The 2 of them pelted in the direction of the West Mountains. "Ah, it must be Xiaoxiao again. Dahai's wife has a cruel fate in this lifetime." All of the women who were doing laundry in the river were used to Madame Lu leaving halfway before she finished her load. 9 times out of 10, it usually had something to do with her sickly daughter. On the other hand, Yu Xiaoxiao was having a more difficult time finding her sister and brother. The mountains here covered a large area, and there were plenty of places for 2 children to pick up firewood. Luckily, Shaolian and little Shido were both cautious and didn't dare to venture deep into the mountain range. The 2 of them stayed at the foot of the mountains. With a little bit of effort, Xiaoxiao finally found them. "Oh my goodness, I'm so tired right now. You 2 really lead me on a merry chase," lamented Xiaoxiao when she found the 2 of them. She collapsed onto the ground and sat on the long grass, completely out of breath. She used her small fists to punch her legs in an effort to loosen the muscles up. This little body is seriously too weak. Even after walking this short of a distance tired it out. In the distance, Madame Lu, who was following her oldest son, could see what had happened. She ran all the way there, her heart in her mouth. When she got to where Xiaoxiao had collapsed, she swept her daughter into her arms and repeatedly asked, "Cower, where do you feel uncomfortable? Mother will bring you home. Xiaoxia, go find Dr. Yu right now." Yu Heng didn't immediately leave and instead asked his sister with concern, "Youngest sister, do you really not feel well?" "What do you mean by, do you really not feel well? Are you saying that she's faking it? Go find the doctor," Lu Muyun exclaimed. She bent down and held her youngest daughter. Yu Xiaoxiao saw that her mother's face had gone white with worry, so she quickly scampered up and jumped twice on the ground to show Madame Lu that she was fine. "Mother, I'm fine. Who told you I wasn't feeling well?" Tell me and I'll hit them for you. Eldest brother, were you the one who scared mother? Are you sure you're feeling okay? Madame Lu inspected her daughter from head to toe. Xiao Xiao really didn't look like she had fallen ill again. She felt relieved, so she turned to scold her son. So what did you call me here for? You interrupted me while I was in the middle of washing. I still have half of the sheets to do. Yu Xiaoxiao quickly came to her brother's defense. Mom, didn't we visit town today? I bought some meat buns for all of us. Here, take a taste. Meat buns. Second sister, are those the large buns? The ones stuffed with ground meat and made with white wheat flour. Little Shatu's eyes opened wide when he saw the pastries in his sister's hands. Saliva started to pool in his mouth as he stared pitifully at his sister. Xiao Xiao grinned and pinched the little boy's cheek. What, do you think there are other types of meat buns? Relax, I also bought some for you. True to her word, she split the remaining 7 stuffed meat buns between her mother and 2 siblings. Madame Lu received 3, while her sister and brother got 2 each. Little Shido carefully wiped his hands on his clothes before he received the pastries from his older sister. He opened his mouth wide and took a giant bite. The slightly sweet bread combined with the dense and fatty taste of the meat harmonized together. In his eagerness to wolf the food down, the little boy almost choked while trying to swallow his large mouthful. Madame Lu tenderly patted her youngest son's back. Instead of eating, she began to scold her oldest son and second daughter. How could you two just disappear without a word and go to town by yourselves? Especially you, Xiaoxia. You know your sister has a weak body, how could you make her walk so far? What would you have done if she had collapsed from exhaustion? Yu Xiaoxiao interjected to defend her brother. Mother, we went with Uncle Ma from the neighboring village. We took his donkey cart into town. Don't worry about me, I'm not tired at all. Please start eating now. If you let the stuffed buns sit for too long, they won't taste good anymore. Where did you get the money to ride the cart and to buy these pastries? Madame Lu asked sternly as she stared at her youngest daughter. Xiaolian, who was eating a meat bun in tiny, small bites, quietly replied, Mother, I gave the money to her so she could take the donkey cart. Earlier I had picked some herbal medicine and sold them. Because it was only a few copper coins, I didn't hand the money over to the main house. Madame Lu persisted, then where did the money for these pastries come from? The meat buns left for her remained untouched. I know, exclaimed little Shido as he waved a small fist in excitement. He had already devoured one of his large meat-filled buns. Yesterday we went to the sea and caught some abalone. Second sister hid them, so she must have sold them for money. Yu Xiaoxiao grasped the little boy's cheeks with both hands and pulled gently. She grinned, our little Shido is so smart. You guessed right. Mother, please don't worry and eat now. The money I used to buy them is clean. Madame Lu had not realized the shenanigans her children had gotten into yesterday. She sighed, you little imp, you're quite daring, huh? But, is it right to hide something like this from your grandmother? What's wrong with it? Mother, you and father are too obedient. Just look at eldest uncle and younger uncle, they're both so selfish. Younger uncle lives in a rented house in town and eats white rice every day. His wife even bought a servant girl to do housework. The hot-tempered Yu Xiaolian complained as she continued to eat her savory pastry. Also, look at eldest aunt and brother Haitzi. Both of them spend the entire day hiding in their rooms eating their own snacks. Look at their figures and then look at yours and little sisters. They always claim that the food they eat is from eldest aunt's maiden home, but it's not like she doesn't have any brothers. Why would they give so much to a daughter who's already married? Such a bad lie. Lu Muyun looked at her children's thin faces and stick-like figures after being prompted by her oldest daughter. She sighed deeply and carefully used the oiled paper in her hands to wrap her share up. Mother, why aren't you eating them? Asked little Shido. He had already started on his second meat bun. After stuffing himself with the first one, he was able to savor and enjoy his second one more easily. The meat buns are really tasty. They have a lot of meat in them. If I could eat some every day, I'd be the happiest boy on earth. Yu Xiaoxiao felt her heart ache after hearing her little brother's declaration. The little guy was too easily satisfied. His vision of heaven was being able to eat meat-stuffed pastries every day. In her previous life, There were too many spoiled brats who could eat meat every day yet were still very picky. When compared to the elementary school-aged Yu Heng and Yu Shaolian, their lives were too different. Children who grew up in poor families truly matured faster. Their mother rubbed her youngest son's head and smiled gently. The hair on his head was brittle and dry. Your mother isn't hungry. I'll leave these buns for you and your second sister for tonight, one for each of you, Yu Xiaosao hurriedly interrupted. Mom. Brother Haitzi somehow always knows when there's food around. He's like a dog, always sniffing around for something to eat. If you bring these buns back, he'll definitely find them. And if he finds them, grandmother will find out. And if grandmother finds out and asks who got the money to buy the meat buns, how would you reply? After thinking for a bit, Madame Lu had to admit her daughter was right. She unwrapped her share of the food and handed one towards Xiaosao. Your mother can't eat this much food. Cower, come eat another one. Xiaosao laughed and patted her bulging belly. These buns are too big for me. I already ate 2 earlier, and I also had a bowl of egg soup. If I eat any more, I think I'll end up exploding. Older brother and I already ate, so you should hurry and eat. Make sure no one sees you. Yu Shaolian had originally planned on leaving her second pastry behind, so she could give it to her little sister at dinner. However, when she heard what Xiaosao told their mother, she started gnawing on her other stuffed bun without any more hesitation. HMPH. That shameless fatty, Yu Haitzi, absolutely can't get a piece of this. Shortly after the whole family finished the meat buns, an unfamiliar male voice sounded from a nearby stand of trees. Auntie Lu, Xiaosha, Shaolian, and little Shido, why are all of you here? The stranger sounded youthful and had a clear-pitched voice. All of them immediately turned their heads around to look. A young man dressed in a neat and casual set of clothes strolled out of gloomy shadows of the trees. A hunting bow was slung on his back. The youth had thick brows and a pair of clear, dark eyes. His nose was straight, and he had a square jawline. Although he was wearing plain, homespun clothing, it didn't detract from his heroic figure one bit. Whoa, the ancients truly did have flower boys. The novels weren't pulling my leg. The young man who almost drowned, the town's handsome and youthful restaurant owner, and this hot and rugged teenage boy are all perfect specimens of good-looking men. Now that I think about it, my own 2 brothers would be quite handsome if they weren't so thin. Yu Heng threw the piece of firewood from his hand in excitement and eagerly stepped forward. Brother Han, are you here to check on your traps? Zhao Han looked at Xiaosao inquisitively before he smiled and nodded. I didn't have time earlier this morning to stop by. Now that I have some free time, I decided to take a walk in the mountains. Is this little girl your second younger sister? Yes, this is my youngest sister. Her name is Xiaosao. When she was first born, she was weaker than a kitten, so my dad decided to give her a name that would help her grow. He hoped that she would be able to grow as quickly as grass and as tenacious as a weed. Little sister, this is Uncle Zhao's son, Brother Han. Go greet him now. Yu Heng caressed her head as if he was petting a puppy. Yu Xiaosao ducked away from her brother's hand and silently grumbled. Can you stop embarrassing me in front of strangers? Isn't it bad enough I have such an unique name? Did you really have to explain the reasoning too? Uncle Zhao's son. Who is Uncle Zhao? Oh right, he must be the son of Hunter Zhao, the village's best hunter. I think father learned how to hunt from this guy, so I probably should treat his son well. Xiaosao pasted a polite smile on her face and sweetly said, older brother Zhao. Zhao Han guffawed. Uncle Dahai calls my dad older brother Zhao. Now you also are calling me older brother Zhao. Who are we referring to now? Xiaosao. Just follow little Shitu's lead. Call me Brother Han instead. Brother Han. Second sister, if you follow Brother Han, then you will be able to eat meat. The little foodie, little Shido, licked his lips greedily. Outnumbered, Yu Xiaosao could only follow their example. Brother Han. The sound of her voice was soft and weak. If Zhao Han didn't have good hearing, he wouldn't have been able to hear her greeting. Zhao Han copied Yu Heng and ruffled her hair affectionately. Are you not fully recovered? You still seem pretty weak. If there's any game caught in the traps, your brother Han will roast some meat for you. Don't forget about me, Brother Han. When little Shido heard that they could possibly eat meat, he immediately jumped up and circled around Zhao Han with admiration. Zhao Han pinched the little boy's cheeks and grinned. Of course, I would never leave our little Shido behind. Brother Han, why are you like my second sister? Both of you really like pinching other people's cheeks for some reason. Little Shido pouted as he scampered away from the youth. The little boy held his face between his two hands and had an aggrieved expression on his face. Seeing that all of her children were laughing and playing happily, Madame Lu glanced at the sky to check the time. Go on and play. I still haven't finished washing the bed sheets, so I need to go back to the stream. Don't play too rough and remember to come home to eat supper. The custom of having 3 meals a day started after the ascension of the first emperor of the current dynasty. Decades had passed since the start of the custom, and so, having breakfast, lunch, and supper was customary among the upper classes and in upscale restaurants. However, most peasants still stuck with having 2 meals a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. The reality was that they couldn't afford to eat more frequently. This was something that Yu Xiaoxiao found very difficult to stomach. Mother, don't worry, I'm here to watch over younger brother and younger sisters. Yu Heng promised. Although he really wanted to tag along with Brother Han to check the traps, he still remembered that they were responsible for gathering firewood. He had just found out from Xiaolian that grandmother had thrown a tantrum when she didn't see him in the morning. In order to appease her, his mother and sister had to take on more chores at home. Zhao Han was well aware of the particular circumstances of this group of siblings. He turned to Xiaoxiao and little Shido and beckoned them to follow him. Do you guys want to follow me to check the traps? Yes, yes. Little Shido, who was still a young child, immediately agreed without thinking. On the other hand, Yu Xiaoxiao felt guilty when she saw her older sister and brother working hard to find firewood. When Yu Xiaolian saw her hesitate, she smiled and said, "Little sister, you're still too weak right now. Do you really think you can help us with this? Don't be a bother and cause more trouble for us by staying here. Second sister, we can still help them collect firewood when we hike down the mountain later." Little Shido had a clever mind and quickly found an excuse to persuade his sister. In her previous life, Yu Xiaoxiao had lived on the plains, so she had never experienced hunting in the mountains. Now that she had the chance, she couldn't resist satisfying her curiosity. After hesitating for a second, she decided to follow the 2 boys. Older brother, Xiaolian, I'll help you guys as soon as I can. I swear I'll come back soon. The traps that Zhao Han had set were all along the periphery of the mountain range, away from the deep forests where more ferocious animals lived. In fact, even larger game was scarce in this area. This was why he was comfortable with bringing 2 small children along with him. It was still summer right now, so the temperature outside was scorching, especially out in the open and under the blistering sun. However, underneath the cover of the trees, it was shady and cool, almost as if it was autumn. The chilly air felt comfortable after sweating the whole morning. Yu Xiaoxiao started to wonder if this would be a good place to escape to when the weather got even hotter. Be careful, Xiaoxiao. There's a trap right in front of you, so be careful not to fall in. Zhao Han warned suddenly. He had noticed that the little girl was looking around curiously and was not paying attention to the ground at her feet. How could she be so inattentive in such dangerous surroundings? A trap. Yu Xiaoxiao bent over to inspect the ground more carefully. To her surprise, there was one patch on the ground that looked different from the rest of the terrain. She had to admit that this brother Zhao had some pretty good skills. Had she not looked carefully, she wouldn't have been able to find the trap. Are you not afraid that some of the villagers might get hurt from your traps here? Other people go through here too? Yu Xiaoxiao asked, a concerned look on her face. Little Shido giggled and interjected, "Second sister, besides you, the entire village knows the marks that the Zhao family uses on their traps. Even the 3-year-olds in the village know what to look for. Look at the knotted string over there. If you ever see this, it means that there's a trap nearby and you have to be careful." At this moment, Yu Xiaoxiao noticed that on a nearby tree, there was indeed a grass rope woven into a distinctive knot. She rubbed her nose sheepishly in embarrassment. Zhao Han skillfully switched the conversation topic for her. "It looks like this trap hasn't been tripped. Let's go further in to check on the others. Xiaoxiao, if you start feeling tired, make sure to tell me." Yu Xiaoxiao raised her voice in assent and followed Zhao Han closely. The three of them went deeper into the forest. The light dimmed perceptibly the further they walked, and the underbrush became more thick and unruly. Fortunately, there was a worn path in the forest so they didn't have to push through too much vegetation. Little Shido grabbed a long tree branch and used it to constantly whip the lush underbrush. Not only would this drive away any snakes, but it could also startle some hidden pheasants to run out in the open. Wait a moment, the handsome Zhao Han called out. He instructed the two siblings to stay where they were while he disappeared into the nearby brush. The forest in the mountains was thick with trees and other plants. Branches crisscrossed against each other and blocked any sunlight from reaching the ground. Occasionally, some beams of light were able to escape through the cracks. There were a couple beams right now that lit up this little grove. Above them a bird suddenly spread out its wings and flew away. It cried eerily as it left. The two kids noticed that a bush started shaking not too far away from them, as if there was something walking through there. Second sister, are you afraid right now? Little Shido asked with a trembling voice. He scuttled closer to her and pulled on her hand. His eyes were large with fright as he scanned the area around him. Yu Xiaoxiao deliberately teased him. Little coward, didn't Brother Han tell you? We're on the outskirts of the deep forest. Most big game won't come here, let alone anything big and mean. Didn't you just say you were going to protect your older sister? Why are you scared now? Little Shido let go of her hand, ashamed, and started to tear a piece of grass apart with his fingers. He softly muttered, when I grow up, I'll make sure to protect second sister. Oh, look, Brother Han's back now. Xiaoxiao turned to face the direction that Zhao Han had left earlier. Sure enough, after the brush rattled a bit, Zhao Han's tall and steady figure appeared in front of them. Look what I have. What do you two think this is? The youth asked as he dangled something in his hands in front of the two little kids. Little Shido hopped up and exclaimed in a voice that echoed, pheasant eggs. Second sister, he has Reeves's pheasant eggs. Eggs are so tasty, and they're great for strengthening the body. Here, take them. In a bit we'll cook some eggs to eat. Zhao Han grinned as he put 5 pheasant eggs into the two siblings' hands. Afterwards, he continued to lead the way through the forest. All of the traps he had set earlier were placed in the dense undergrowth. From time to time, the young man would walk off the dirt path to inspect his traps while the brother and sister pair stayed on the trail. After inspecting more than 10 traps in the past 2 hours, Xiaoxiao was starting to feel exhausted. Luckily, their trip was not in vain. One of the traps had caught a freshly killed wild hare, while Zhao Han was also able to shoot down a fat and plump turtle dove. You guys must be tired now. I bet you both are also hungry. I know a good place for us to stop at and make some food. Throughout the journey, Zhao Han had kept a close eye on the two siblings. Little Shitu's condition was not bad. He spent most of his time running around like crazy with the other kids from the village, so he had a decent amount of energy in his little body. On the other hand, Yu Xiaoxiao had a weaker constitution. The difference between the two wasn't surprising. For someone who had been sickly since the day she was born, it was a miracle Xiaoxiao could walk so long on a rough, mountain trail. Zhao Han knew this area of the forest like the back of his own hand. He led the two siblings through the dense underbrush. After tramping through the forest for another quarter hour, Yu Xiaoxiao suddenly noticed that they had walked into an unexpected area. They were in a beautiful valley that seemed to appear from nowhere. The sides of the valley were bracketed on both sides by the mountains. Verdant green leaves shimmered in the sunlight, and the valley seemed to be carpeted lushly with vegetation. A small creek gurgled happily through the valley. The flowing water cut through the grass like a dark blue thread in a piece of fine brocade. Even the air seemed more clear and fresh here. Wow, this is amazing. It's such a beautiful place. Yu Xiaoxiao deeply inhaled the fresh air into her lungs and breathed out dreamily. Zhao Han smiled and watched indulgently as the little girl plunged into the long grass and rolled around comfortably. To him, she looked like a cute little cat, spoiled and adorable. This valley is rather hidden, so no one else has discovered it except me. I've already checked inside the valley, and it seems safe inside. You guys wait here for a moment, while I go retrieve the seasonings. Let's barbecue here. Although the Zhao family lived at the foot of the mountain and far away from Dongshan village, Zhao Han had also heard about Madame Zhang's stingy personality. The Yu family rarely had the chance to eat meat throughout the year and were only able to occasionally eat the fish that couldn't be sold. Go, go, quickly go and come back soon. After wandering through the mountain forest for over 2 hours, Yu Xiaoxiao had already digested the 2 big meat buns she ate in the morning. It would be quite interesting to have a picnic at such a picturesque mountain valley. Second sister, there's fishes in the stream. Little Shido was washing his hands in the stream when he saw palm-sized fish darting between the cracks of the rocks. He hastily took off his shoes and went to grab them with his hands. However, he was unable to catch the little fish, who were nimbly swimming within the water. Yu Xiaoxiao, who had been holding the worn-out ceramic pot within her hands, immediately went over with great interest when she heard his call. Watch me, I'll scoop them up with this jar, huh? These fish were quite strange. They immediately came over when they saw this jar, instead of running away. Moreover, they gathered together as if they sensed the fish baits. Little Shido was also surprised, and exclaimed in a seemingly clever manner, "Oh! I know, the jar was filled with meat buns earlier, so there was still the tasty smell of the meat buns inside. The little fishes must have been lured over because they were hungry. Let's catch some more, so we can stew soup when we go back." There were more and more little fish gathering around the ceramic pot. They were swimming around as if there was something attracting them within the jar. Was Little Divine Stone's spiritual energy also capable of acting as fish bait? Yu Xiaoxiao put the multicolored stone on her wrist inside the jar. After the pot was submerged deeper into the stream, the little fishes were even more eager to squeeze into the jar. Soon, the earthenware jar was densely packed with little fish, squeezing together like sardines. The ones that didn't get in continued to linger around the mouth of the jar. There seems to be more and more fish gathering over. Yu Xiaoxiao, you little brat, how dare you use me, this divine stone, as bait? You're seriously too much. After several days of silence, that voice finally sounded beside Yu Xiaoxiao's ears again. Gradually, a small glittering ball emerged from within the jar. The little divine stone appeared in the form of an angry little golden kitten. It was baring its teeth at Yu Xiaoxiao and glaring at her with its tail raised up. "Oh, little divine stone, you're finally awake. Have your powers recovered?" Yu Xiaoxiao cried in surprise. Little Shido stared at her in confusion and asked, "Second sister, what did you say? Were you talking to me?" Xiaoxiao suddenly remembered that other people couldn't see the little divine stone's spiritual form. She rubbed her nose and awkwardly replied, "I'm talking to myself. I'm not talking to anyone. You can carefully take the jar out. There's enough little fish inside. You're so dumb, you don't even know how to use your mind to communicate with me. It's like this, if you want to say something, just think about it in your mind and I'll be able to hear you." Seeing her embarrassment, the little divine stone somersaulted in the air, while laughing at her mercilessly. Yu Xiaoxiao wasn't bothered by it and continued to ask, "Have you recovered all your spiritual powers? It can't be that fast. This divine stone, nearly used up all my powers to cure your injury last time. If you hadn't placed me inside the mountain stream, and the spiritual energy in this stream was still intact, I wouldn't have been able to make an appearance. Although the spiritual energy in this world is too weak, it's still 100 times better than your previous world. No, my spiritual powers are still too weak right now, so I can only appear briefly. I'm leaving now. Remember to soak my body inside the stream." The golden light around the little divine stone flickered several times, then it disappeared from Xiaoxiao's line of sight. "Hey, second sister, come over quickly. There are too many small fishes. Should we tie them to a rope and bring them back?" Shido grinned from ear to ear as he looked at the little fish inside the jar. It was enough to cook a big pot of fish stew with so many little fishes, which will make grandmother nag less. Xiaoxiao was also grinning happily while thinking about the tasty fish stew. "Leave them in the jar for now. The weather's too hot, so there will be a stinky smell after they die. Pick out several of the bigger fish. We'll grill them to eat later." As she spoke, she arrived at the side of the stream and put the multicolored stone between the pebbles at the bottom of the stream. Luckily, the little divine stone woke up and controlled its powers. Otherwise, If it attracted all the fish in the stream or other animals, it would have been seriously troublesome. Brother Han, look at the fishes we caught. Little Shido picked out several fish that were about half a foot long and showed off to Zhao Han, who was rushing over. Zhao Han was shocked to see so many fish inside the jar. The fish in this stream are very agile. I've tried many times and only caught 1 or 2 fish after for a long time. How did you guys catch so many in such a short time? What's your secret? Teach Brother Han, too. If I told you that the little fishes swam inside themselves, would you believe me? Little Shitu's big eyes gleamed as he asked with a mischievous expression. Zhao Han laughed, then lifted him up and tossed him in the air. While the little guy was screaming, he caught him in his arms again and said, "Do you think your brother Han is easily fooled? If you told me that a pheasant flew into the pot, I might have believed you. All right, let's roast the meat." Zhao Han had returned home and brought back a wide range of seasonings. Yu Xiaoxiao looked over the seasonings he brought over. He even had a spice like cumin. She lowered her head and sniffed that familiar tan-colored powder. That's cumin. You haven't seen it before, right? Zhongwen Emperor brought it back from the south when he was still the imperial crown prince. There's also chili pepper. Zhongwen Emperor was allegedly an avid lover for spicy flavors. However, not everyone can get used to spices like cumin and chili peppers. I can eat them, but if you guys don't like the spices, you don't have to use them. Zhao Han and his grandfather were also lovers of the piquant taste. At this time, chili peppers had not been popularized. All the vegetables that the Yu family ate were grown in their own gardens, so they naturally didn't have any chili peppers. Without any oil and spices, their meals were just poached vegetables with a small amount of salt. If Yu Xiaoxiao wasn't hungry, she seriously wouldn't be able to eat it. Yu Xiaoxiao had great admiration for the gourmet Zhao Han. He was able to collect such a vast variety of spices like the bright red chili powder, cumin, anise, cinnamon, and fennel. Without any other choice, Zhao Han took up the responsibility of taking care of the hare and turtledove. Shido was chattering on the side as he watched him, while Yu Xiaoxiao voluntarily picked up the firewood to start a fire. She occasionally looked towards them and thought, this young man was only around 12 or 13 years old, but he was quite skilled in skinning the hare and cutting out the internal organs. It was obvious that he was accustomed to doing this. The fire was quickly lit. The hare was smeared with salt and various seasonings, then placed on top of the fire to be roasted. The turtledove was stuffed with spices and covered with mud before being thrown into the fire to be roasted. The pheasant eggs were also covered with a layer of wet mud to prevent them from bursting, then set beside the fire to be baked. Yu Xiaoxiao had over 10 years of experience with cooking and making braised foods, but she wasn't skilled in cleaning and preparing game. She could only help on the side by mixing the seasonings. It has been a while since she last ate meat. Author note: did she forget about the meat buns? Thus, it was extremely hard for her to resist the alluring aroma of the roast hare. Zhao Han wiped the sweat on his face with his shirt. He couldn't help but laugh when he saw Xiaoxiao and her younger brother's eager expressions. Be patient. We should be able to eat soon. The wild hare I caught today is quite plump, and it will definitely be tasty. The grease from the roast hare dripped into the fire, making a sizzling sound. The blazing flame carried the appetizing aroma of the roasted meat into the air. The smell floated throughout the valley, enticing the siblings. Hunger. By the time the crispy, golden brown roast hare was finally ready, Yu Xiaoxiao was already close to drooling. The siblings looked at the steaming roast hare and didn't know where to begin. A smile appeared on Zhao Han's handsome face. He gently shook his head and took out the sharp dagger that he used to peel the wild hare earlier. After carefully washing the dagger in the stream, he cut off and gave the hind legs to the siblings. The hind legs were the most tender parts of the hare. There were 2 young children, so Zhao Han didn't add too much spicy seasonings on the roasted meats. He gave each of them a hare's hind leg, which weighed half a catty each. Then, he added more chili powder and cumin on the remaining meat. Yu Xiaoxiao felt really envious when she saw that, so she pestered Brother Han to add some more for her too. Even if there was only a thin layer, it was still able to enhance the taste of the roast hare. With bright red lips, Xiaoxiao was covered in sweat as she ate. It seemed like she still needed to slowly train herself to be accustomed with spicy foods. Little Shido was eating his non-spicy roast hare leg as he watched his second sister sucking in cold air and tearing up due to the spiciness. He curiously wondered, if eating the chili pepper is so painful, then why were Brother Han and second sister still eating it? He seriously couldn't understand them. They were obviously just torturing themselves. The little fellow took a big bite of the savory hare while lamenting that today was even better than the new year. After eating big meat buns at noon, he was also allowed to freely eat roasted meat in the afternoon. Was this really not a dream? By the time they finished eating the roast hare leg, the beggar's turtledove one was also ready. When taking off the thick mud, the turtledove's feathers were also completely peeled off along with the mud shell. The flavors of the bright red jujube and fragrant spices, which were inside the stomach, had seeped into the meat of the wild turtledove. With a fragrant aroma, it had a crisp and tender texture, which easily melted in the mouth. Xiao Cao and her younger brother had both just finished eating a hare leg, but when faced with such appetizing roasted meat, they couldn't resist eating more. Thus, they ended up eating too much, and were whining while rubbing their bellies. Zhao Han looked at them with amusement. After plucking a few large leaves, he cleaned them with water and wrapped the remaining meats within the leaves. Take these roasted meats back home for Xiaoxia and Xiaolian to eat. But be careful not to let Haitzi see it, or else, he'll take it all from you guys. Yu Xiaocao noticed that he didn't eat a lot of the roasted meat and asked with slight embarrassment, Brother Han, you were busy working all afternoon. Why don't you eat some more? I'm already tired of eating game meat. In my opinion, vegetables and tofu are tastier. Zhao Han gave her a half-truth reply. In fact, it was considered pretty good if an ordinary family was able to eat meat 2 times a year. Even for a hunter's family, it was impossible to eat meat on a daily basis. So, how would he be tired of eating meat? Xiao Cao felt very touched because she knew that he just wanted to save the roasted meats for the Yu siblings. From the corner of her eyes, she saw a fish jumping out of the cracked mouth of the earthenware jar. With a cheerful smile on her face, she said, Brother Han, try my cooking, special grilled fish too. It was special, because grilled fish wasn't one of Xiao Cao's specialties. In an environment with limited seasonings, she was already rather skilled to be able to make the palm-sized fish crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It smelled quite good after she sprinkled a layer of cumin and chili powder on top. Do you want to taste it? Yu Xiaocao was confident in her cooking skills, but it was her first time grilling fish directly above an open fire. So, she was somewhat worried. 2 small whitefish were strung on a wooden stick. Zhao Han went closer and sniffed it. There weren't any weird smells, so he bravely took a small bite of the fish. Oh, it tasted pretty good. He originally had doubts about Xiao Cao's cooking skills since she was constantly bedridden and had never done any chores. Was her cooking even edible? However, it was unexpectedly very crispy and delicious. It was savory and slightly spicy, which was quite difficult to make. How is it? How is it? Xiao Cao asked with anticipation in her eyes as she grilled another skewer of fish. Delicious. Your cooking skills are pretty good. As proof of his evaluation, Zhao Han took a big bite of the grilled fish skewer. These little, wild whitefish had delicate meat and a delicious taste. Moreover, it didn't have any small bones. Even if it was used to make soup with just plain water and salt, it would still be very tasty. Although little Shitu's tummy was already bulging like a ball, he was still staring at the grilled fish in Zhao Han's hands and drooling. Yu Xiaocao was amused by her younger brother. She tore a small piece of fish meat off the freshly grilled fish skewer and comforted him, you can't eat any more. Be careful of your belly bursting. You're only allowed to have a taste. Zhao Han laughed when he saw Shido savoring the grilled fish within his mouth. Like a hungry little kitten, he was reluctant to even swallow this small bite of fish. The 3 of us are the only ones who know about this valley right now. If you want to eat grilled fish, Brother Han can just bring you here again. Zhao Han ate a few skewers of grilled fish and noticed that the sky was getting darker. He took the ceramic pot from Xiao Cao's hands and brought the reluctant siblings back to Dongshan village. They didn't need to take a detour to check on the traps on the way back, so the return trip took twice as fast. Nevertheless, they still missed dinner time. The Yu family's customary rule was, whoever returns late and misses the mealtime would just have to starve. Don't even think about preparing a separate meal. However, Yu Xiaoxiao didn't want to eat the dry pancake and disgusting porridge anyways. She felt more at ease now that she had money in her hands. These 9 taels were going to be her capital for earning money in the future, so she must hide them securely. Zhao Han had planned to send the siblings home, but as soon as they arrived at the village, they saw Yu Heng and Xiaolian waiting for them at the entrance. Eldest brother, eldest sister. Brother Han caught a wild hare and wild turtle dove. They were really tasty when roasted. I saved a lot of roasted meat for you guys. Shido ran over in an obedient manner and shared the hare meat wrapped in the leaves with his older siblings. Yu Heng gently wiped the dirt off his face, then he gave him a knock on his head and said, "You really know how to curry favor. Since it was Brother Han's game, did you even ask for his consent?" Little Shido rubbed his forehead and giggled. It was Brother Han who said to save them for you guys. He didn't even eat much himself. Yu Heng was even more unwilling to take the roasted meat from his hands. "Brother Han, you should take it back for Grandpa Zhao and Auntie to eat." Zhao Han glared at him and spoke with a stern expression. "What? You guys call me Brother Han, so what's wrong with treating you guys to some roasted meat? If you still have respect for your Brother Han, then just eat it." Among all the children in the village, except for the gifted scholar Qian Wen, Yu Heng admired Zhao Han the most. Zhao Han wasn't only a skilled fighter but also a good hunter. Thus, he couldn't turn him down again. He gave most of the roasted meat to his younger sister, then asked Xiaoxiao and Shido, "Do you guys want to eat some more?" Xiaoxiao hastily shook her hands. "I'm already completely stuffed. Also, look at Shitu's tummy. It almost looks like a bloated toad." Little Shido laughed foolishly as he rubbed his round belly cooperatively. "Very well, you guys are secretly eating meat here. I'm going to tell grandmother. She will definitely beat you guys to death." Yu Haixi jumped out of the dried ditch beside the road and threatened as he stared at the roasted hare meat in Xiaolian's hands. Apart from Yu Heng and his siblings, Zhao Han rarely interacted with the other children in the village. However, he had heard of Haixi's bad reputation. He couldn't help but frown and stepped forward to say, "I was the one who gave them the roasted meat. Do you have a problem with that?" The plump Yu Haixi timidly stepped back when he saw the strong and burly Zhao Han, who was a head taller than him. But he didn't plan on giving up on the chance to eat meat. His beady eyes swiftly darted around, and he cried out in a seemingly fierce manner, "I don't care. You guys are eating meat by yourselves, and completely disregarding our grandparents and the rest of the family. You're being disrespectful to your elders. If I go make a complaint, you guys will definitely receive a beating. Unless what?" Zhao Han had already seen through his intentions and calmly asked. Haixi wiped his saliva with his dirty sleeve and confidently said, "It's very simple. If you don't want me to complain, just give me half of the meat." Zhao Han pursed his beautiful thin lips and sneered, "We can share a portion with you, but half is impossible. The roasted meat should be divided equally among the 3 of you. If you don't agree, then I'll just take them back, and none of you can eat any." After hearing Zhao Han's words, Yu Haixi abandoned his greed and swiftly agreed. If he continued to bargain, he wouldn't even get to lick the bones. Zhao Han took the roast hare, which was missing 2 hind legs, and tore off the 2 forelegs, as well as the meat around it. Then, he handed them to Yu Heng and Yu Xiaolian. After that, he gave the hare's ribs and back, which had relatively less meat, to Yu Haixi. Yu Haixi really wanted to protest, but he could only give up on that idea after Zhao Han swept a gaze over him. Although he received a smaller portion of meat, but he got a bigger piece. He hadn't eaten meat in a long time, so he was satisfied that he could at least gnaw on the bones. After Haixi left with the roasted meat in his arms, Yu Xiaoxiao took out the turtle dove hidden behind herself and gave it to Yu Heng and Xiaolian. The siblings were only half full from their meal at home. However, with the roast hare and turtle dove, they ate until they were burping. The filial Yu Heng said guiltily, "It's a pity that we couldn't bring them back for father and mother to taste." Shido took out several mud-covered eggs from his pocket and grinned, "That's all right. We still have some roasted pheasant eggs. Let's secretly give them to our parents to eat at night." They were just eating some eggs, but they had to sneak around like a thief. Zhao Han sighed inwardly as he caressed little Shitu's head sympathetically. Yu Xiaoxiao hadn't been at home for the entire day, so when they returned home, it was inevitable that she had to endure a series of nagging from Madame Zhang. However, Xiao Xiao wasn't one of the main laborers at home. Thus, Madame Zhang paid very little attention to her. She was already grateful if that wretch doesn't fall ill and waste her money on medical fees. Xiao Xiao, you haven't eaten yet, right? Youngest aunt has a few eggs and half a steamed bun. Take them to share with little Shito. Be careful and don't let your grandmother see you. Her youngest aunt, Katie, quietly approached Xiao Xiao and stuffed the eggs into her hands while Madame Zhang wasn't looking. Although Xiao Xiao was already very full, but she couldn't tell her directly. She just whispered, "Youngest aunt, it's all right. If grandmother finds out, hurry and take it. Isn't it fine as long as my mother doesn't find out? Actually, your grandmother just has a sharp tongue. She's not really a bad person." Katie had a gentle temper and spoke in a soft voice, which sounded very comforting. Xiao Xiao didn't decline anymore and felt grateful within her heart. There's still ample time ahead, so she will repay her kindness in the future. Xiao Xiao, what are you holding in your hands? Are you secretly hiding delicious food? Madame Li's fat body shook as she ran out of her room. She stared at the worn-out jar within Xiao Xiao's hands with her beady eyes. Xiao Xiao didn't have any good impression of her eldest aunt whatsoever. She replied in a muffled voice, "What is this? You can just check yourself. Eldest aunt, don't unfairly accuse me of stealing again. Second sister isn't like brother Haitzi, who's always going through other people's room every day. The jar is filled with small fishes that Uncle Zhao's son, brother Han, helped us catch. Second sister said she want to make fish stew for us to eat." While his older siblings were distracting everyone, little Shito had already sneaked into his room and securely hid the roast pheasant eggs. When he saw eldest aunt trying to snatch the jar in his second sister's hands and slandering his second sister by calling her a thief, he couldn't resist defending her. Madame Li angrily glared at little Shito with her small eyes, which appeared like a slit on her chubby face. She reached out her fleshy hand and wanted to twist his ear. "You little brat. What nonsense are you talking about? When did your brother Haitzi ever poke around in other people's room? Be careful that I don't tear mouth for gossiping." Little Shito skillfully dodged Madame Li's evil hand and shouted, "I'm not speaking nonsense. Who stole the pastries that younger uncle brought back the last time his family visited? Brother Haitzi still had crumbs on his mouth when he was caught." The old lady, Madame Zhang, came out of her room and screamed, "What's with all the fuss? Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed by others? Katie, bring the jar into my room. Your third brother sent a message back and said he'll come home for a few days. We don't have anything good at home, so let's make some dishes with these small fish tomorrow. Grandmother, these fish are still alive. It's better to keep them in a vat filled with water. If the fish die, it would be hard to keep them in this hot weather." Xiao Xiao handed the earthenware jar to her youngest aunt and suggested. She didn't want to have stinky fish stew tomorrow. Madame Zhang grunted with an awful expression on her face. She watched as her youngest daughter put the fish into the water vat and counted the fish before returning to her room. No wonder grandmother was so merciful, and didn't scold Xiao Xiao for over an hour when she found out Xiao Xiao went to town today. It turned out that younger uncle's family was coming home. Xiao Xiao was extremely exhausted today. After carefully hiding the money she earned today, she was already nodding off when her mother bathed her. Xiao Xiao was so tired that she didn't even know when she finished bathing. She was in a daze as her mother carried her to the Kong bed and immediately fell asleep after being placed on the bed. It was already late in the morning on the next day, but Xiao Xiao was still grunting and refusing to get up. Her legs were sore, and her feet hurt. This body seriously lacked endurance. She really shouldn't stay in the room all the time in the future. Shito, who was 3 years younger than her, ran around the mountain and helped with chores every day, but he was still so energetic after a night's sleep. Xiao Xiao put on her patched outer garment and went out to the courtyard to wash her face. However, Madame Li, who was wandering around with a broom without actually sweeping the floor, started to look for trouble. She really has the body of a noble young lady with the life of a servant. It's impossible to find another person in the entire village who gets up this late. Does she really think she's some precious child? Madame Li screeched in a sharp tone, covertly mocking her. Xiao Xiao was somewhat familiar with that fat woman's personality. The more attention she received, the more excited she became. Everyone in Dongshan village knew that whoever spoke with old Yu's eldest daughter-in-law would have to endure her for at least half of the day. She was a talkative person who would pester anyone who interacted with her. "Oh, my precious grandson. Come and give your grandmother a hug. Be careful of the doorsill, my precious grandson is so amazing. You were able to cross over such a high doorsill." Madame Zhang, who usually treated herself as the boss of the family, had actually spoke in such a gentle and soft voice. Moreover, there was even a slight sense of flattery within her voice. Yu Xiaoxiao looked towards the sound. She saw Madame Zhang bending down to help a chubby 2-year-old infant walk over the doorsill, while a young couple walked behind her. The man had a refined appearance with a fair complexion. He had inherited his good looks from the Yu family. The woman had ordinary features, but she had pale and smooth skin. Her light complexion enhanced her features, so she wasn't bad looking. There was a young girl, who looked around 12 or 13 years old, following behind them with a big baggage in her hands. She was wondering why it was so quiet in the courtyard, so it turned out that they went to fetch younger uncle's family. Yu Xiaoxiao smirked since she was already used to Madame Zhang's differential treatment. "Xiaoxiao, don't stand there like a log. Hurry up and go tell your mother to come back to cook. How can she still be indolent at this time?" Madame Zhang's arrogant and bossy attitude emerged again when facing Xiaoxiao. Yu Xiaolian came out of the kitchen expressionlessly and said, "My mother went to wash the laundry. She has to wash the whole family's laundry, so how would she be able to finish it so quickly? Watch your mouth. You're so capable now that you're rudely rebutting your elders. Is that what your mother teaches you?" Madame Zhang swiftly swallowed the vulgar curses that she was about to spit out and peeped at her youngest daughter-in-law's expression from the corner of her eyes. Yu Bo's wife, Zhao Meilan, didn't say a single word ever since she entered the courtyard. She had a faint expression on her face, which looked neither happy nor angry. Yu Xiaolian wasn't a pushover and retorted, "Grandmother, I was only speaking the truth. How was I being rude to you? My mother had certainly gone out with a basin full of clothes." Yu Xiaoxiao went into the kitchen, then came out again. "Grandmother, younger uncle's family just come back all the way from town, so they must be tired. You should take them to their room and let them rest for a bit. Xiaolian, quickly go get the fish. Weren't we planning to add some dishes for younger uncle's family?" Her younger aunt, Madame Zhao, finally looked at Xiaoxiao after hearing her speak. She asked in a low voice, "Is this second brother-in-law's youngest daughter?" Younger uncle, Yu Bo, finally noticed the wan and thin young girl. He happily said, "That's right. Xiaoxiao, you seem to be in good spirits today. Did you come out for some sun?" Yu Xiaoxiao didn't have any ill feelings towards her younger uncle and aunt, so she replied with a smile, "Younger uncle, my health is already better now. I haven't been sick for over a week. Sure enough, you do seem to have recovered from your illness. You have become livelier and more articulate. It's great that you're better now. It's good to be healthy," younger uncle cheerfully said as he walked forward and touched her head. Yu Katie came out of a room on the west side of the main room. She smiled at her third brother and sister-in-law. "Third brother, third sister-in-law, your room is ready. Hurry and go take a rest. We soon be eating soon. Dudu, do you still recognize youngest aunt? Our Dudu is back. Come and let eldest aunt give you a hug. Why is our family's Dudu so cute?" Madame Li spoke in a tone that was filled with an obvious sense of flattery and fawning. Yu Xian, whose nickname was Dudu, was pulled into her embrace and his face was buried within Madame Li's fleshy body. Madame Li was a lazy person who hated bathing, so there was always a stench of sweat on her body. The young Yu Xian had never encountered such a situation before. He immediately began crying while desperately struggling to escape. Madame Zhao's expression turned cold and ordered the young girl behind her, "Why aren't you bringing your young master back?" The young girl gave the baggage in her hands to Xiaoxiao, who was enjoying the lively scene. She hastily ran to rescue her young master and shouted, "What are you doing? Hurry up and let go of our young master. What's wrong with you?" Madame Li, who had been pushed, loosened her hold on the young Yu Xian with embarrassment. Darn it, she made a mistake while trying to flatter them. "I don't want you to hold me. I don't want you." The 2-year-old little Dudu cried until his eyes turned red. He pushed the young girl aside and also refused the embraces of both his parents. With his arms opened, he staggered a few steps as he ran and ended up hugging Yu Xiaoxiao's legs. What kind of situation is this? Yu Xiaoxiao was still holding the large bag that the young girl handed her, so her upper body was practically buried by the mountain-like baggage. Now, there was also a little infant holding onto her leg like a koala. The young maid tactfully retrieved the baggage from Xiaoxiao. She looked at Xiaoxiao and hinted by nudging her lips at her young master, who was hugging Xiaoxiao's legs and seeking comfort. It can't be helped. She just had that protagonist aura. Even a young infant couldn't escape from her charms as the protagonist. Yu Xiaoxiao was very pleased with herself as she thought about it. She bent down to lift up the little fellow, who was crying pitifully. Little Dudu looked small, but he actually quite heavy. She tried very hard before she finally lifted the little fellow up while wobbling. Yu Bo, who was beside them, was frightened by the sight and opened his arms to protect them. It was often said that children had keen senses. Yu Xiaoxiao had been drinking mystic stone water for several days and had also been wearing the multicolored stone every day. Thus, it was natural that she had a bit of spiritual energy on her body. After little Dudu was attacked by Madame Li's stench, he followed his instinct and searched for the spiritual energy, which was his source of comfort, Yu Xiaoxiao. Little Dudu stopped crying after Yu Xiaoxiao unstably lifted him up. He widened his dark eyes and looked at her curiously. He asked in a cute voice, "Who are you? I've never seen you before." His father interrupted him anxiously, "Dudu, this is your second sister. Come down quickly. Your second sister can't hold you. Be careful of falling." "No, I don't want to get down. Dudu likes second sister. She smells really good." Little Dudu's plump arms were wrapped around Xiaoxiao's neck as he sniffed her like a little puppy. Madame Zhao finally had an expression on her face when interacting with her son. She said rather helplessly, "Dudu, your second sister's health isn't very good. If she's too exhausted, then she can't play with you anymore. So, come down and let mother carry you." Little Dudu looked at Xiaoxiao, and then looked at his mother. It was difficult for him to make a choice at the moment. In her previous life, Yu Xiaoxiao had raised her younger siblings by herself, so she was very skilled in dealing with children. Our Dudu is so cute, so second sister really likes you too. Is Dudu hungry? Do you want second sister to make some fish stew for you? Yes. Dudu wants to drink it. Children were all little gluttons. The little foodie Dudu swiftly came down from Yu Xiaoxiao and waited for the fish stew. Madame Zhang had been constantly trying to attract her little grandson's attention, but she never expected him to be deceived by that little wretch. After giving Yu Xiaoxiao a fierce glare, she smiled at her youngest son and daughter-in-law, "Go take a rest in your room. I'll go cut some meat and make your favorite, stewed fatty meat and cabbage, for lunch." The Yu family's meals had always lacked oil. There were only 2 occasions when the family could eat meat. The first was during the New Year, and the second was when Yu Bo, the hope of the entire family, came home. Stewed fatty meat and cabbage, was Yu Bo's favorite dish during his childhood. Yu Bo was already accustomed to eating stir-fried dishes in town, so his taste in food had changed a long time ago. However, he was unable to refuse his mother who wholeheartedly cared for him. Madame Zhao glanced at him, then entered the west room indifferently. Zhao Milan, who was the only daughter of a county scholar official, held contempt for the whole Yu family. Her mother-in-law was stingy, while her eldest sister-in-law was vulgar and lazy. Her second sister-in-law was cowardly and incompetent. Moreover, none of the children in the family were presentable. If she had a choice, she seriously didn't want to stay in the Yu family's house at all. However, they were her husband's family, so she still needed to give her husband some face. By the time Madame Zhang returned from the butcher's in the neighboring village with half a caddy of fat meat, Madame Lu also came back after washing the laundry. Without giving her a chance to take a break, Madame Zhang had ordered Madame Li, who was aimlessly wandering around the courtyard with a broom, "You go dry the clothes." Second daughter-in-law, "You go cook." The entire family had unanimous approval for Madame Lu's culinary skills. Madame Zhang personally washed the meat and cut it up on the cutting board. After that, she counted the pieces and instructed Madame Lu, "Third son likes the dishes that you cook the most, so cook well and don't slack off. You guys help with the preparations. Even if Madame Zhang didn't say it, Yu Xiaoxiao and her sister wouldn't have let their mother do all the work alone. After she left, Xiaoxiao smiled and said, I doubt younger uncle and aunt like to eat stewed fatty meat and cabbage. Mother, why don't I try making a couple of dishes? I have a lot of recipes in my mind that I haven't had the chance to try out. You can cook, but you're not allowed to touch the meat. Your grandmother knows very clearly how many pieces there are. When they had good ingredients, Madame Zhang would always take account because she was afraid that people would steal some while cooking. Big pot mixed stew, too, was very popular in most villages in the north. However, not all ingredients were suitable for the mixed stew. Yu Xiaoxiao had been craving stir-fried dishes, but she didn't have any oil. Madame Zhang was so stingy that she wasn't even willing to purchase vegetable oil. Xiaoxiao looked at the fatty meat and tried to persuade her mother to make some lard with a portion of the meat. The meat can be stewed with cabbage, and she could cook with the lard. Lu Muyun briefly pondered the idea. The meat would slightly shrink after extracting some lard, but as long as she cooked it carefully, it wouldn't look too unsightly when stewed. Today, third younger brother and third sister-in-law came home, so one meat dish really wasn't enough. Moreover, all the other dishes were bland and tasteless. Thus, she decided to use the meat to make a small bowl of lard. There were a lot of people in the Yu family, so they usually used two stoves to cook. One was used to cook the bean porridge, while the other was used to make stewed vegetables and millet pancakes. Madame Zhang was very happy today, so with great mercy, she allowed the pancakes to be partially made with wheat flour. She would rather be a miser and suffer herself, than let her youngest son suffer a little. She was even more unwilling to be looked down on by her youngest daughter-in-law, who was the daughter of a county scholar official. She was still waiting for her youngest son to earn a noble title for her so that she could enjoy old age with her son's success. Yu Xiaoxiao saw her mother using the usual method to stew the pork slices and cabbages, which was just throwing them together in one big pot. Afraid that the meat dish would be ruined, she quickly stopped her. Mother, let me cook this dish. I promise it will be even tastier than the one mother makes. Madame Lu was afraid that the old lady would scold Xiaoxiao, so she rejected the idea at first. In the end, she couldn't help giving in to Xiaoxiao and Xiaolian's constant pleading. However, she insisted on supervising on the side. Xiaoxiao had already instructed her younger brother to borrow some chili peppers from the Zhao family. Without a tinge of spiciness, the stewed pork and cabbage would definitely taste bland. After deciding not to use the usual method to stew the dishes, she used an oiled pan to stir-fry ginger, scallion, chili pepper, and Sichuan peppercorn. After that, she put the meat into the pan to stir-fry, while also adding some salt and soy sauce. Next, she placed the cabbage millet pancakes in the pan, and after a short deliberation, she also added some mystic stone water inside. Xiaoxiao noticed that the mystic stone water had the ability to enhance freshness. It was still the same dish, but with different cooking methods, the tastes were naturally as different as day and night. It smells great. Are we eating meat today? Yu Haixi, who had been playing wildly outside for the entire day, had a keen nose like a dog. After smelling the fragrant aroma, he followed the scent and entered the kitchen. Before he had the chance to sabotage the food, Madame Zhang, who was behind him, had already pulled on his ear and dragged him out. Eat, eat. You only know how to eat. What else can you do other than eat? Go and stay in your east room. If you dare to sneakily eat the food, I'll chop your hands off. After that, she glared warningly at Madame Li, who was lingering in front of the kitchen. The crafty and lazy Li Guiwa hastily lowered her head. She started to sweep the floor, while repeatedly turning to look back. Madame Zhang looked at the stew fatty meat and cabbage, sniffed it a few times, and blandly said, your culinary skills have improved. Continue to cook this way in the future. Xiaoxiao interjected, Grandmother, if you bring back some soybean oil, we can cook like this every day. We can't do anything without oil. Madame Zhang's heart ached at the thought of how much money was needed to buy oil. However, in order to maintain her own dignity, she turned to leave while cursing, buy oil. Should I just tear up this old body of mine to make oil for you people? Xiaoxiao's mouth twitched and grumbled, even if you want to, it doesn't mean we're willing to eat it. You probably can't get much oil with that dry and bony body of yours, cower. How can you speak in that manner to your elders? If this spread out, would you still have a good reputation? You can't act in this way in the future. Madame Lu was cleaning the pot as she disciplined her daughter. Yu Xiaosao didn't rebut her, but she still felt indignant inwardly. We need to have filial piety to the elderly, but we can't be foolishly devoted to them either, right? Xiaosao vented her anger through cooking. Whoosh! She swiftly completed the stir-fried eggplants with garlic, 4 dry-fried string beans, 5 fresh greens with mushroom, 6 and stewed meat and cabbage. In the other pot, an appetizing aroma was emerging from the delicious fish stew, 7. Even Madame Zhao, who was napping in her room, was inwardly surprised by the Yu family's pig food. When did it ever smell so good? It's time to eat. Little Shito, who had been dutifully helping to tend the kitchen fire, exclaimed excitedly. Second sister's cooking skills were so amazing that he could hardly contain his saliva. The men and women sat on separate tables for the morning meal. Today, the women's table also had the same dishes as the men's table. 4 pots that emitted an appetizing aroma were swiftly served on the table. There were many people in the Yu family, so their foods were usually served in pots. There's meat. We're eating meat. Yu Haixi sniffed up his yellowish snot, while also wiping his mucus with his sleeve blackened with dirt from time to time. Instead of washing her hands, Madame Li also just wiped her dirty hands on the front of her worn-out clothes. Madame Zhao took a look and was so disgusted that she almost puked. There was no way she could have any appetite in front of this dirty mother and son duo. Madame Zhang, who had been closely observing her youngest daughter-in-law, followed her line of sight. She frowned, took a bowl, and grabbed some food from each dish. After that, she turned towards Madame Li and her son. It's too crowded at the table, so you two go back to your room to eat. Madame Li stared at the alluring meat and tactlessly said, we have 2 extra people, so it is a little crowded. Why are the little brats, who are under 10 years old, sitting at the table? Aren't you brats going to hurry up and make some room? As she spoke, she couldn't resist lifting her chopsticks to grab the largest piece of fatty meat. However, she was blocked midway by her mother-in-law. Madame Zhang furiously glared at her thoughtless eldest daughter-in-law and spoke with an aggravated tone. I'm telling you to go back to your room to eat, so stop with all your nonsense. By restricting the children from eating at the table, who are you trying to mock? Madame Li watched as little Dudu earnestly waited at the table to drink his second sister's fish stew. She suddenly realized that she had said something out of line. Third brother-in-law would likely become an official in the future. She needed to flatter her third sister-in-law in order to take advantage of having an official in the family. Look at my awkward mouth, I just blurt out words without thinking. Third sister-in-law, I wasn't scolding your son Dudu, please don't take it to heart. The table is a little crowded, I'm going to take Haixi out and go back to our rooms to eat. Madame Li finally took the hint from her mother-in-law. Although she felt reluctant, she still towed her son behind her to leave. Yu Haixi only cared about eating food. However, he was a crafty young fellow and decided to take advantage of the situation and haggle for more food. If you want me to leave the table, give me a few more pieces of meat. If you don't, I'm going to stay here to eat. Madame Zhang had no other choice but to give in to his demands. Although she lambasted him under her breath for being a small-minded bastard, she still placed a couple pieces of meat into his bowl. She glared fiercely at Madame Li, reminding her that she needed to leave with her son. With the 2 unhygienic people gone from the table, there wasn't much to complain about for the remaining Madame Lu and her 4 children. No matter how busy she was, Madame Lu made sure to keep her entire family washed and clean. Her husband's younger sister, Yu Katie, was at the age where a girl loved being clean and beautifying herself. Madame Zhang was also a sanitary person. Zhao Milan barely managed to squeeze herself into a seat next to her son. Under the encouragement of Madame Zhang, she lifted her chopsticks and picked up a piece of stir-fried green vegetable. She slowly placed it into her mouth. For such a simple dish, the stir-fried fresh green vegetables with shiitake mushrooms tasted surprisingly delicious and refreshing. Madame Zhao chewed her mouthful delicately, slowly swallowed, and then raised her head to look her second sister-in-law, Lu Muyun, in the eye. She nodded her head in approval and said, "Second sister-in-law's culinary skills have improved immensely in these past few months. The food tastes better compared to a few months ago." Lu Muyun smiled at her youngest daughter and with a voice full of pride said, "The dishes today were all cooked by Kaur. I only helped her to wash the vegetables and the pots. I didn't make any of the food today." A rarely seen smile graced Madame Zhao's face. "I wouldn't have expected Xiaoxiao to have this kind of talent." Madame Zhang felt displeased that her youngest daughter-in-law was paying attention to other people. She picked up a thick slice of fatty meat with her chopsticks and thrust it into Madame Zhao's bowl. "Third daughter-in-law, I especially made sure to select the fattiest cut of meat today. This type of meat will ooze out flavorful oil when you eat it. Quickly try some." Madame Zhao looked at Madame Zhang's greasy and oily chopsticks. Who knew how much saliva was on those things? She felt her stomach lurch with disgust. Sensitive to her mistress's likes and dislikes, her servant girl hurriedly took the piece of greasy meat and said, "Elderly lady, my mistress doesn't like to eat fatty cuts of meat. This servant thanks you in her stead." Seeing that a piece of meat that even she herself felt was too precious to eat being taken by a mere servant girl infuriated Madame Zhang. Her expression immediately darkened with anger. She slapped the table with a heavy hand and started haranguing, "Huh, you impudent servant. Do you have the status to sit with us at the same table to eat? How arrogant are you? And you even had the gall to eat meat. What kind of servant are you? Third daughter-in-law, you need to discipline this maid." Madame Zhao placed the chopsticks onto the wooden table with a loud slap. Her full red lips were pressed into a straight line. Despite the obvious signs, Madame Zhang had not noticed that her daughter-in-law was tampering down rage and heedlessly continued to spew criticism at the maid. "Mother-in-law, before you punish a dog you need to ask permission from its master. Anything that my maid did wrong, I will punish her myself. By yelling at her in front of other people, are you insinuating that you are displeased with me?" Madame Zhao interjected with a soft and even-tempered voice after seeing her servant hold back tears in her eyes. Madame Zhang choked down the rest of her complaints, and her old, wrinkled face turned a bright red color. She wanted to scream a few harsh words at Madame Zhao, like she usually did to her other two daughter-in-laws, to discipline her. However, she was afraid that Madame Zhao would whisper honeyed and poisoned words to her husband in the bedroom and cause her favorite son to grow distant from her. Huffing with anger, the old woman thrust her chopsticks into the stewed meat and cabbage dish and picked out a large and thick piece of fatty meat. She dropped it into her bowl. "If you're not going to eat the meat, then this old lady will eat it instead." Seeing that her grandmother was preoccupied, Yu Xiaoxiao saw an opportunity and quickly placed pieces of meat into her mother's, older brothers, Shaolian and Shitu's bowls. Although she didn't like to eat fatty cuts of meat, it didn't mean the other members of her family were the same. The Yu family considered themselves lucky if they could eat meat once or twice in the year. Therefore, they appreciated the fatty pieces of pork the most. When Lu Muyun saw that her youngest daughter was too thrifty to eat meat, author's note, "You're thinking too much, she simply doesn't like to eat it," but braved her grandmother's poor temper to place meat into her own bowl, the piece of meat became hard for Madame Lu to swallow. However, if she tried to put it back, her mother-in-law would definitely scream at her if she was found out. Noticing that her mother was hesitating, Xiaoxiao softly whispered into Madame Lu's ear, "Mother, I don't like being yelled at, please eat the meat faster." Suddenly, she noticed her grandmother lifting her head from her food. Yu Xiaoxiao hurriedly gave her grandmother a couple of dry-fried string beans. She smiled sweetly, "Grandmother, have some string beans dry-fried in lard. They're almost as delicious as meat. You're old so you should eat more. You're such a crafty brat, how come you're not telling me to eat more meat? Our whole courtyard garden is filled with string beans. There's nothing special about these." Madame Zhang had never mastered the art of filtering her words and always blurted out what was on her mind, no matter how unpleasant it was for others to hear. During this exchange, Madame Lu and her other children had all bolted down the meat that they rarely got to eat, even during New Year's celebrations. Since Yu Xiaoxiao successfully completed her mission, she neatly grabbed a couple servings of dry-fried green beans and wrapped them in a pancake. She ate the wrap with lively delight. The dark green string beans glistened with a light coating of oil. The fragrant aroma of lard had infused into each string bean, such that every bite was flavorful without feeling greasy. Even Madame Zhao grabbed a couple of extra servings of the vegetables. Little Dudu sat at the dinner table like a small adult and kept his mouth wide open, waiting to be fed. The simmered fish stew was as white as cow's milk and was full of savory flavor. The meat of the fish was delicate without any bones to ruin the texture and complemented perfectly with the rich broth. The little boy's mouth smacked with delight as he happily drank the soup. This little fellow had a picky palate, and Madame Zhao had gone through many trials to get him to eat more. She even would be willing to cut off her own flesh if it made her son want to eat more food. This time, her son was eating voraciously. If she was slow in feeding him, he even started opening his mouth wide and made little, ah, noises begging for more. The sight of him eating with a hearty appetite made her feel incredibly happy. Since Yu Xiaoxiao had simmered the delicious soup that her son liked to eat, Madame Zhao's demeanor towards the little girl improved perceptibly. Other than Yu Katie, Yu Xiaoxiao was the only other person in the entire Yu family that Madame Zhao deigned to converse with. Madame Zhang's entire face folded into a brilliant smile as she watched her youngest grandson. Grandmother's sweet grandson likes to drink fish soup, so grandmother will leave her bowl for you. Madame Zhao looked at her with a bland expression and sweetly said, Dudu usually doesn't eat a lot of home. I don't dare to feed him too much in the event that he might get bloated. Hearing that, Madame Zhang dropped the subject and merely smiled while watching little Dudu eat his fish. She was so preoccupied that she forgot to eat her own food. Xiaoxiao glanced at her little brother who was slurping fish soup next to her. Little Shido was only a little bit older, but he was also Madame Zhang's grandson. However, the difference in treatment between the two little boys was blatantly obvious. It really made her heart ache for her little brother. On the other hand, little Shido had long become accustomed to his grandmother's cold treatment. He was solely preoccupied with eating his own meal. The food today was astoundingly sumptuous and luxurious, more so than usual. His second sister had better culinary talent than mother. Without his cousin, Haitzi, there to fight for food, he needed to take advantage of the circumstances and eat more. The men at their own table also ate with great gusto. Even old Yu ate 2 more pancakes than usual. Yu Hai seized the opportunity to complete his youngest daughter's mission and suddenly stated, the vegetables today are pretty much as tasty as the meat. Father, do you think the same too? Old Yu took another serving of the eggplants sautéed with garlic. Because his teeth had started to fall out of his mouth, he liked eating soft and tender foods like the stir-fried eggplants. Unconsciously, he devoured about half the plate of eggplants by himself. After hearing Yu Hai's opinion, the old man, satisfied by the meal, naturally didn't stint on his praise. Yes, the taste is indeed very good. Our family's Xiaoxiao has talent, her hand at cooking is better than her mother's. Xiaoxiao's mother did a good job raising her. There's a well-known saying, the student has surpassed the master. Third son, is that how it goes? Old Yu was quite proud of the phrase he remembered and thought quite highly of himself. He held his beard out of the way as he sipped a mouthful of wine and smacked his lips in pleasure. Our Yu family is quite cultured. Father, you said it perfectly. However, Xiaoxiao's dishes were all stir-fried with oil. Our family usually only boils vegetables with some salt. There's no fat added, so of course it's not as delicious as vegetables stir-fried with oil. In the future, our family should continue cooking vegetables this way. After finally eating a satisfactory meal at his family's house, the third son, Yu Bo, was in a good mood and topped off his father's glass. Old Yu shook his head after he heard what his son said, you should know your mother's personality. If we bought pork every day to make lard, it would hurt her stingy heart more than cutting her flesh directly would. At this point, Yu Hai interjected, we don't need to use lard, vegetable oil could be used instead. Didn't our family save some dried soybeans from last year? We could bring them to the oil mill in exchange for some soybean oil for cooking. The food cooked with the oil should still taste good. If they used soybeans as the trade instead of money, maybe his wife would be more willing. Old Yu carefully calculated the possibility of his wife agreeing to this. When Yu Bo saw how happily everyone at home was eating the food cooked with oil, he considered their circumstances again. Choked with emotion, he couldn't help but set down his chopsticks and urged his father quietly, Father, if other people found out that our family found it too much of a burden to even get a bottle of soybean oil for the sake of my education, can I still in the academy anymore? Would no one actually expose this? Father, please advise mother to not be so stingy. There are already people at school who are gossiping behind my back. Scholars valued their reputations the most. Yubo had already heard bad rumors about himself, such as, he lives in a large manor in town, eating and drinking good food, while his parents and siblings back home have to count how many pancakes made with coarse grains they could eat for each meal. His main goal in coming back this time was to persuade his mother to stop being a miser for the sake of his reputation and to stop the rumor mongers from discrediting him. However, as her son, he was very familiar with Madame Zhang's temperament. Therefore, he could only talk about it with his father and have him discuss the situation with his mother. The old woman always wished she could spend half a copper coin for something that cost one. She was stingy to everyone in the family, including herself, and always restricted how much food people could eat. His second son's children were all on the brink of starvation with their bone-thin frames and their unsteady gaits. But, for the sake of his youngest son's education, old Yu usually turned a blind eye towards his wife's miserly ways. However, if her thriftiness was starting to impact their son's reputation, then it could no longer go on. Their youngest son had the fate to become an official, and it would be a disaster if his wife's penny-pinching ways caused his son to lose that chance. Old Yu came to a resolution and decided he needed to talk to his wife about the situation. That night, under the light of the lamps, the old couple discussed their circumstances. For the sake of her son, Madame Zhang obviously had no objections. The very next day, the old lady went on her own to the oil mill and traded half a sack of soybeans for a pitcher full of soybean oil. In addition, she no longer restricted how many coarse grain pancakes people could eat anymore. Without her heavy restrictions, the family's store of food naturally disappeared more quickly. Madame Zhang's heart trembled at the sight of the increased expenditures and inwardly screamed, "Who's the one spewing nonsense from their mouth, all day speaking nonsense? I hope a rat goes and eats his tongue." The people who profited the most with this change, naturally, was Yu Xiaoxiao and the rest of the second branch. At least now, everyone in the family, large and small, could eat until they were full. In addition, every few days Yu Xiaoxiao would intercept some game from her father for their own use. Gradually, the members of the second branch started to flesh out. That's right, under the attacks from Yu Xiaoxiao's strategic pleads and skillful begging, Yu Hai, who already blindly loved his daughter, could only surrender to her whims after a minimal struggle. Every time he came back from a hunt, Xiaoxiao would always be at the foot of the mountain waiting for him, with no one else around, to choose the fattest piece of game to leave behind. She would then take the game into that hidden valley to either barbecue or simmer the meat in the ceramic urn until cooked and bring home later for the household to eat. Sometimes Zhao Han would divvy out some meat he caught from his traps to give the kids an extra meal. They also plundered the creek's store of small, white fish frequently. For most people, the wild fish were slippery and hard to catch, but Yu Xiaoxiao never had difficulty harvesting the fish. Although Zhao Han inwardly felt it was odd, he never tried to figure out how the little girl caught the fish. Adolescent boys could always out-eat their elders. In fishing villages near the sea, young boys and girls, other than gathering seafood or tending the courtyard gardens, weren't of much use. For the sake of her youngest son's reputation and future career, Madame Zhang's heart palpably ached when she increased the family's food ration. 2 months after the change, the family's expenditures had more than doubled. The increased spending combined with her entrance into menopause caused Madame Zhang to hate everyone she saw. When the men left for the sea, if the old woman wasn't berating the adults, she was hitting the children. Complaints flew out of her in an endless stream. During mealtimes, Madame Zhang barely managed to stem her complaints in an effort to soothe the men's egos. However, her eyes flitted around like daggers. Whoever grabbed an extra flatbread was subject to a hateful glare. Naturally, she hoped that her daughters-in-law and their group of brats would tactfully eat less. But her hope was in vain. Her eldest daughter-in-law wouldn't know tact even if it hit her in the face. As long as there was food at the table, she would eat it. Her eldest grandson had inherited his mother's habits and gobbled down food at the table as if he was a starving animal. Although her second daughter-in-law had a weak and timid personality, her two daughters were nothing like their mother. Even though Madame Zhang would glare at them until it felt like her eyes would pop out and her face would burst, the two brats ignored her as if nothing was going on. If they weren't giving their mother another pancake, they were grabbing their brothers another serving of vegetables. Now that there was oil added to their food, it didn't matter whether the dishes were stewed or stir-fried, the taste of all the food had improved tremendously. Every meal, with her eldest son's family leading, became a brawl to snatch as much food as possible. Those who had slow hands wouldn't even be able to lick the leftovers off a plate. The two chits' hands flew so quickly on the table that one could only see their shadows. After their hands had stopped, their timid mother who never dared to grab food, even-tempered older brother, and tiny youngest brother, all had their bowls filled with food. Not only did her two granddaughters grab food for their family but their own appetites were also voracious. Seeing all of this made Madame Zhang's heart throb with pain. In the past, with only Xiaolian being unruly, it was easy enough for Madame Zhang to smack the girl a couple of times and then have the brat comply. Now that there was an additional troublemaker, Yu Xiaosao, it had become more difficult to maintain discipline because of the wretch's sickly constitution. Hitting the minx was obviously out of the question, but even yelling at her was enough to scare her into a dead faint. A situation that happened before her third son and his family had left was a perfect example of the difference now. At the time, 3 steamer baskets full of steamed rolls had been brought to the table. The little hellion had immediately transferred one to her mother, and also gave a serving to her 2 brothers who hadn't even sat down yet. She acted as if she was the master of the house. Madame Zhang really couldn't stand these perceived transgressions anymore at the time. Her personality was never one to take an insult sitting down, and so, as her temper flared, the old woman slapped a heavy hand down on the wooden stool. However, before Madame Zhang could open her mouth to start yelling, the little brat's eyes rolled into the back of her head, and the chit fainted. Everything immediately turned to chaos. Someone went to call the doctor, while another ran out to buy medicine, and so, hundreds of coins flew out of Madame Zhang's purse. Spending money was bad enough, but her husband also whisked her aside and scolded her profusely. Furthermore, up until the day her third son's family left to go back to town, her youngest daughter-in-law regarded her with contempt. Afterwards, Madame Zhang sank into a gloomy depression and almost ended up ill from her pent-up feelings. From then on, she just pretended that the chit, Xiaosao, was invisible. No matter what the little girl did, the old woman would ignore it as if she had never saw it. Luckily the brat, other than mealtimes, kept to her own devices and didn't cause other problems that Madame Zhang found hard to abide. For the sake of saving money, she could endure anything. Mother, mother, Madame Li's obese figure hurriedly came back into the courtyard from outside. As she crossed the threshold, the fat woman almost tripped and fell over. She looked around the entire courtyard furtively like a burglar before she pulled Madame Zhang into a nearby room. She mysteriously said, "Mother, haven't we spent a lot of money on the household recently? I feel bad for you. The entire second branch really eats too much. Their 4 children eat almost as much as 3 adults combined." Madame Zhang felt her temper rising again and complained in agreement, "Exactly. A whole bag of coarse grains disappears in a matter of days. Money flows out this household like water from a river. It's driving me crazy, and my mouth is full of sores from worry. Second son's wife comes off as honest, but how come she's not relieving the burden at home?" Madame Zhang complained as she slapped her thigh rhythmically. Her entire face was creased with resentment. Madame Li replied in an empathetic tone, "That's just how it is. Second son's wife pretends to be busy on the surface. She even tells outside people that she is the only one who does housework at home. Is there anyone who doesn't view her as a good wife? On the other hand, outsiders only call me lazy. However, mother-in-law, you have become an evil mother-in-law who treats her daughter-in-law poorly in the eyes of others." Madame Zhang gnashed her teeth together in anger and snarled, "That vile little wretch. She turned out to be such a malicious woman. I'd misjudged her." Seeing that her aim had been achieved, Madame Li came to the true purpose of her visit. "Mother, the only reason why she's doing this is because she has a lot of children. In the future, she'll have plenty of people to support her, right? However, I definitely have a method to reduce her confidence. The fact that she has many children only means that she's able to have them. Unlike you who could only lay one egg without any other progress. Madame Zhang had always felt bitter that her eldest daughter-in-law only gave birth to Haitzi alone. However, now was not the time to pursue this topic. The old woman continued to ask, "What sort of method? I'd like to hear it. My older brother from back home told me that the carpentry shop in town was looking for an apprentice. Second branch's Xiaoxia isn't young anymore and, as an apprentice, he'll eat and live away from us. That will save us from feeding another person's portion of grain, and, in the future, he'll be able to make a living as a craftsman." Madame Li's spit flew out of her mouth as she spoke. Madame Zhang frowned. "Carpentry shop? Is that the one owned by Zhang Ji? I heard that shopkeeper Zhang Ji is really cruel and that apprentices in that store keep changing. Some of them had even become permanently injured and disabled." Madame Li's waved a plump hand dismissively. "Those are just rumors. My older brother knows shopkeeper Zhang personally and said he's usually very friendly. Otherwise, how could he have such a thriving business? He just has high expectations for his apprentices, that's all. Who doesn't want to find an apprentice that is more competent and hardworking, right?" After thinking a bit, Madame Zhang had to conclude that the second branch's Xiaoxia was not a lazy boy. Sending him out to become an apprentice wasn't a bad idea. After all, in several years, the boy would be able to do woodworking and could make a lot of money. That night, during mealtime, Madame Zhang disseminated the news to all of the people. "Xiaoxia is diligent and sensible. He also learns things quickly. Who knows, maybe in a couple of years he'll be able to finish his apprenticeship and then make his own money. With a skilled trade he'll have a much more stable future than relying on the winds and waters to make a living. The carpentry shop is only looking for one apprentice, otherwise, I would also have Haitzi go too. In the future, the two cousins could take on work or open a store. Wouldn't that be a good life?" The rest of the household didn't have any opinions, but Yu Hai was a bit hesitant. "Mother, I've heard that carpentry apprentices spend a long time doing rough and heavy work. Xiaoxia is still small. I'm afraid that he doesn't have the strength to lift and work the heavy wood." The old woman's expression darkened and put her bowl down on the table loudly. "He's already 11, you still think he's small. In 2 years he'll be able to marry a wife. Second son, you cannot spoil your kids. Mother is trying to treat you guys well. Carpenter Wang back in my hometown worked every year to build other people's furniture. He always had plenty to eat and clothes to wear. He has a better life by far compared to us." Yu Xiaoxiao looked anxiously at her older brother who was being left out like a tasty piece of meat. Inwardly she cursed, "It's not just Carpenter Wang who has a better life. Most villagers eat better and wear better clothes than us. We don't live like this because we don't have money, it's because you're too stingy, grandmother. You only care about younger uncle. Trying to send out such a young child out to become an apprentice, you're truly too heartless." She used some force to poke at her bowl of bean soup and muttered, "If this is such a good opportunity, why don't we send brother Haitzi first? He's older than older brother by 3 years and is about the size of an adult. He's still bumming at the village provoking random cats and dogs all day. Shouldn't he go out and learn something?" Madame Li promptly jumped in and scolded her, "This is an adult conversation, how could children participate? Second brother-in-law, how could spoil your kids so badly?" Madame Zhang wanted to yell something but managed to resist and swallowed it back down. Instead she said, "Haitzi has a poor personality, what can he do? If we sent him out, he would only be sent back in a couple of days. If we're talking about ability, Dahai from a young age was always skillful with his hands. When other people were weaving baskets, he only watched them a bit before he learned it. Xiaoxia is like his dad and wouldn't be bad at learning a skill. Mother, I wasn't saying I don't want him to go. I just want to wait 2 years to give him time to mature. Once he has grown in height, then he could go," Yu Hai said good-naturedly. He still felt worried about his little boy who had slowly grown under his eye. Madame Zhang interrupted him, blurting, "Do you think this carpentry house is owned by us? Do you really think you can just let your kid come and go as you please? Other families whose kids are apprentices all sent them when they were young. Once he's older, he'll be slow at picking things up, who would want him then?" As Yu Hai was about to reply, the previously silent Yu Heng calmly interjected, "Father, grandmother is right, I'm no longer a little kid anymore. Learning a craft isn't a bad thing for me. The neighboring village's Schwan was an apprentice before. He told me that as long as one was clever, quick and diligent with one's hands, then there wasn't much suffering to be had. I want to go. Yu Hai knew that his oldest son, who usually seemed quiet and dull, had big aspirations and ideas. He thought for a bit and decided that letting his son try wouldn't be a bad thing. If it didn't work out, he could spend a couple bits to bring his son back home. Seeing how enthusiastically eldest aunt was pushing her older brother to be an apprentice, Yu Xiaoxiao felt that there was something fishy about the whole situation. However, she couldn't pinpoint what exactly was wrong with the idea. She could only watch helplessly as her elder brother packed his things in a cloth and was sent to go to the town's carpentry shop. In a flash, the blistering hot summer days had passed and cool and refreshing autumn had leisurely arrived. Right now was just the time to harvest the soybeans and sorghum from the fields, and everyone was brimming with joy from the harvest season. The Yu family was a model example of a fisherman's household. They focused heavily on fishing and hunting and only had 3 acres of sandy soil which were planted with the high-yielding crop of sweet potatoes. It wasn't yet the time to harvest those, that was about a month away. Game was at its peak in autumn. Every fall, the Yu family no longer allowed Yu Hai to go out to sea to fish and instead had him stay back home especially to hunt. Almost every day he went up the mountains to hunt. Sometimes he would partner up with Hunter Zhao, but more often than not, he was on his own. Yu Xiaoxiao tried to capitalize on her father's favor and tried her best to persuade him to take her with him. However, after thinking about all of the dangerous animals he'd encountered throughout the years and his daughter's sickly body, Yu Hai explicitly refused. He only consoled her by promising her he would always leave a piece of game for her. Eating the same thing every day, even wild game, would get cloying after a while. Now that her immediate family had enough to eat every day, Yu Xiaoxiao was no longer preoccupied with eating and drinking. She needed to earn money. As long as she had money, there was nothing she needed to worry about. Unfortunately, at this present time, she could only earn money surreptitiously. If they could separate their branch from the rest of the family, then she could make money much more easily. Unfortunately, most families in the ancient world never divided their households, so the hope for this happening was quite uncertain. Furthermore, since Yu Xiaoxiao was only 8 years old, her options for making money were so limited that it was pitiful. With that compounded with the need for secrecy, she really had a hard road ahead of her. Out of desperation, she switched her attention to the multicolored stone that was on her wrist. The divine stone noticed her gaze and leapt out to confront her. "Don't think you can use me as bait. I'm the magnificent stone that was used to patch the heavenly skies, how can I be used in such a humble manner?" Yu Xiaoxiao replied, slightly embarrassed, "Little glutinous dumpling, do you think I have any other options? You once said that every time you helped me, your master, the purity and speed of absorption of spiritual power would increase for you. Being used as a magical fish bait is helping me. Otherwise, how else would my whole family have bodies that are now so strong and healthy? Where else would you find such a chance to display all of your powers?" The celestial stone had previously, in a peek over the nickname, glutinous dumpling, one chosen by its weak owner, refused to acknowledge Yu Xiaoxiao for several days. Later on, since the little girl refused to repent, the stone had to begrudgingly allow itself to be called by such an unimpressive name. It was really quite depressed by this outcome. Under Yu Xiaoxiao's persuasions, the multicolored stone started to waver on its stance. Every time it helped its master, it could feel the goddess of spirits' restrictions loosening a tiny bit. Afterwards, the purity and amount of power it could absorb would also improve. If it wanted to break through the goddess of spirits' chains, shatter the void, and return to goddess Nua's side, it needed to help its master do more good things. At its current state, there were very few opportunities that it could help its master with. Acting as fish bait for Xiaoxiao really hurt its pride as a divine stone. But for the sake of accelerating its power intake to get back to goddess Nua's side, it was willing to be fish bait. While the stone was making a decision, Yu Xiaoxiao had already prepared a rope. Brother Han had promised that he would teach her how to set traps today. If she had little glutinous dumplings help, then she would definitely hit bank every day. Having me help you, it's not an impossible request. As before, the stone sent out its spirit in the form of a golden kitten floating in the air. At this moment, It was pointing its little ears back and had an unwilling look on its face. However, you need to bathe me every day in the water from that valley's creek with the fish. That place's water aura is much more pure compared to other sources. Okay. Deal. Xiao Xiao reached out a hand in an attempt to pet it. A golden kitten about the size of a ping-pong ball was really too cute. It made her heart melt. However, the celestial stone proudly blocked her hand with a pair of wings that were made of light from its back. Light flickered as it dodged her caresses, and it twisted its little head to ignore her. Second sister, why didn't you call me? I almost overslept. Little Shatu's clothes were crookedly put on, and the little boy carelessly wiped his face as he ran. On the way, he picked up a carrying basket and followed Yu Xiaoxiao out the door. The early morning air was crisp and fresh. Yu Xiaoxiao deeply inhaled a breath of the moist air as her tail, little Shido, walked leisurely with her towards the West Mountains. Xiaolian, you're up so early. Are you out to gather some fishwort for pig feed? Ever since the little divine stone started helping her, Xiaoxiao's body became more healthy with every passing day. In addition, she often ate on the sly outside of the Yu residence, so her face and body had both gradually fleshed out. Now that her figure had become more like her older twin sister's body, the villagers often mixed the two up. Little Shido giddily ran towards the young girl who had mistaken his second sister and said, "Sister Linglong, this my second sister." Second sister, Xiaoxiao. Oh my, you're definitely a twin, you look so similar to your sister. Zhou Linglong curled her lips up into a smile and continued to inspect Xiaoxiao from head to toe. Xiaoxiao merely smiled but kept silent. Little Shido introduced his sister in her stead. Sister Linglong's family doesn't live far from the West Mountains and is near our old family residence. Auntie Zhou and mother have a good relationship. When you were sick, the eggs you ate were all from Auntie Zhou. Oh, so she's the daughter of mother's best friend. Yu Xiaoxiao smiled sweetly at Zhou Linglong and a faint dimple formed on her left cheek. It's nice to meet you, older sister Linglong. On another day I will need to drop by to thank Auntie Zhou. Without her eggs, I would not be able to recover this quickly. Zhou Linglong stared at Xiaoxiao's dimple for a bit and then grinned. It's just a couple of eggs, nothing worth mentioning. I figured out how to differentiate between you and your twin. You have a dimple and your older sister doesn't. Yu Xiaoxiao beamed a smile at her and said, Sister Linglong, we're going with Brother Han up the mountain to pick some wild fruits. Do you want to come with us? Zhou Linglong revealed the sickle in her hand and shook her head. I need to harvest some fishwort and then go back home. We have 2 pigs, and they've been squeaking for their food incessantly. You guys can go and play, just be careful. Yu Xiaoxiao waved her hand at the departing girl, linked hands with little Shido, and ran towards the hill where the Zhao family lived. The villagers at Dongshan fishing village had all worked for generations as fishermen. The Zhao family had moved in more than 20 years ago as outsiders. Their family residence was located on top of a small hill that was at the foot of the West Mountains. The house was constructed out of rock and had 3 rooms. A tall fence made of stone enclosed the courtyard and building. Trees surrounded the residence on all 4 sides, and gardens full of vegetables and fruits bordered the front and back of the building. The entire complex gave off a feeling of a dwelling suitable for a hermit living in the deep woods. Brother Han, little Shido called out as he moved quietly to push open the wooden door and inserted his head in to take a look. In the middle of the courtyard was the Zhao family's daughter-in-law, Zheng Fangyan. She twisted her head around and saw the little fellow looking around. The older woman smiled benevolently. Oh, it's little Yu Fan. Quickly come in. Madame Zheng wasn't sure whether her body had gotten injured after birthing her son, but after Zhao Han was born, she was never able to get pregnant again. In the past few months, little Shido had gained some weight and had become a strong and good-natured little boy. Madame Zheng, who loved little children, adored his cute and witty character. She had a heart full of maternal love. Auntie, Brother Han told us that he was going to teach us how to set traps to catch hares. Second sister really wants to learn, so we came early, hee hee. The little fellow rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment while he threw his sister under the bus. Yu Xiaoxiao had followed behind her younger brother to enter the courtyard. She surreptitiously jabbed him in the back as her pretty and pale little face beamed an incandescent smile at the older woman. Good morning Auntie Zhao. Oh, Xiaoxiao, Madame Zheng put down the basin full of chicken feed on the ground and wiped her hands on her apron. She tenderly caressed Xiaoxiao's thin and pointy face. She sighed. One is bound to have good fortune after surviving a great disaster. Being healthy is more important than anything. You're still a little thin. Your grandmother, in the future, if you ever want to eat anything, come to Auntie's house. Auntie's cooking skills are not too bad. Thank you, Auntie. I'll have to bother you in the future then. Yu Xiaoxiao would not bluntly refuse a helping hand, especially when it was offered with a genuine and sincere heart. Instead, she received the older woman's care with an even more brilliant smile. Shido, Xiaoxiao, why are you both here so early? Have you two eaten breakfast yet? Zhao Han asked with obvious surprise. The youth had come in through the gate carrying a load of water on his shoulder and had seen the two siblings in the courtyard. Little Shido butted in before his older sister could reply. Our family only eats breakfast at 7 in the morning, we don't have time to wait until then. Anyway, it's better for us to leave some room in our tummies so we can eat roasted fish later. Madame Zheng linked her hands with the two siblings and led them into the main room. Her voice was full of disapproval as she chided, you have a long way to walk before you'll get to the mountains. You're both so young. If neither of you eat breakfast, how would either of you have the strength to get through the day? I've already simmered porridge and griddled pancakes this morning, let's eat together before you go up the mountain. Grandpa Zhao. The two children greeted a white-haired old man who had a long beard and sat upright in a formal, proper posture. The elderly man, Zhao Zishong, cut an imposing figure. From time to time, his eyes would reveal a majestic aura that could not be entirely hidden. The pair of siblings couldn't help but be a little subdued in his presence. The old man looked up and saw two children who, despite being dressed in shabby clothes, still radiated an aura of sweetness. He revealed a smile and said, you two are both good children, but it's too bad you're stuck with a father with no backbone. You've both endured hardships. My father's fine. He knows how to fish, hunt, and weave some simple bamboo tools. He really loves us too. In front of others, Yu Xiaoxiao naturally had to defend her father's reputation. Old Zhao raised his bushy eyebrows and chuckled, you are quite protective of your father. However, it's too bad that your father can't protect your siblings and your mother. If he can't defend the people most dear to him, is he still considered a man? Father-in-law, don't say such things in front of the children, let's eat now. Madame Zheng was afraid the brother and sister pair would start feeling awkward and hastily stepped in to change the subject. She immediately served up bowls of congee and plates of flatbread to the old man and the children. The Zhao family had kept to the custom of eating 3 meals a day. Breakfast consisted of a thick porridge made with white rice, while the pancakes were also made with white flour. In addition to that, Madame Zheng had also cooked 2 vegetables, bacon stir-fried with mushrooms and Napa cabbage seasoned with vinegar. Being able to eat porridge made with white rice and white flour flatbread was already a treat, but there was also meat. Little Shido stared avidly at the sumptuous breakfast in front of him but didn't have the courage to start eating. It was only after Maiden Zheng hand-delivered him a thin pancake rolled around some mushrooms and bacon did he raise his head sheepishly to look at his second sister. Upon seeing the little boy's hesitation, Zhao Han also stuffed and rolled up a piece of flatbread before he placed it in front of Xiaoxiao. The youth grinned and said, eat. We're going to walk a little farther today, so if you two don't eat, you'll become exhausted, right? I don't have the strength to carry the both of you down if that happens. Thank you. Please excuse me as I start then. Yu Xiaoxiao was tired of eating brown flour pancakes and drinking bean soup every day. She had long missed the taste of eating food made with white flour and white rice. The little girl took the offered pancake, nodded her head at her little brother, and then opened her mouth to take a giant bite. She had never thought that a plain flatbread made of white flour could taste so delicious. When combined with the salty and savory taste of bacon, it elevated this humble dish into the realms of delicacies. As Madame Zheng served food onto the two children's plates, she also told her son, you can't take these 2 kids into the deep forests of the mountain. There are wild boars, wolves, and other ferocious creatures in those areas. The children need to be protected from harm. Zhao Han peeled a hard-boiled egg, placed it into Xiaoxiao's congee bowl, and nodded his head. Mother, don't worry, I've been there many times and the largest animal I've ever seen was either a roe deer or mountain goat. Something along those lines. It's very safe. After they finished breakfast, Zhao Han took the two kids, who had accidentally eaten too much, to a twisted and windy road that snaked up the mountain. When you're setting traps, the first thing you need to do is to discover which routes the hares like to go on. Hares will often stick to using the same route. See here, there's a small worn path in the underbrush that a hare left behind. Zhao Han pointed at a slightly messy patch of grass as he patiently explained the process. Yu Xiaoxiao eagerly replied, then we should set a trap here. Who knows, maybe by the time we get back we'll have a rabbit in the trap. Zhao Han laughed, this area is too close to the open outside, so there won't be a lot of rabbits coming through here. How about we walk a little bit deeper into the woods before we try? We should take the opportunity now to practice first. How should a trap be set? Brother Han, teach me quickly. Yu Xiaoxiao refused to let go of any opportunity. After all, didn't she have a secret weapon? Zhao Han raised his thick eyebrows and an indulgent smile crossed his face before he said, okay. We have plenty of rope with us, so let's set one here. He inspected the area around them first and then broke off a fork-shaped branch from a nearby tree. He trimmed off miscellaneous twigs and pruned it until the middle of the fork was clear. The youth explained as he cut, when you're choosing a branch, make you find one that can handle the weight of a running hare. Otherwise, you won't be able to successfully catch one. Yu Xiaoxiao nodded her head in silence as she tried to engrave the instructions inside her head. Zhao Han placed the pruned branch on the hare's trail and made sure it was in the exact middle of the path. This would ensure that the hare would dive straight in between the forked branch when it came by again. If we add the rope noose to this, would the trap be ready then? Little Shido watched the whole process with increasing interest and felt that it was quite easy to set traps. Zhao Han ruffled the little boy's hair and replied, we still need to insert a couple more branches on the sides of the trap. The purpose of adding those sticks is to prevent the rabbit from swerving past the lasso. By plugging up all the other escape routes, the hare can only go into the noose. The youth then brought out the rope, tied a loop, and inserted it onto the forked branch. The lasso was about 10 centimeters, 3 above the ground. Yu Xiaoxiao used her own hand to measure the distance and memorized how far it was. In the future, this would be her ticket to making money. Brother Han, the noose looks so big, won't the rabbit be able to escape? Little Shido asked anxiously as his innocent large eyes looked at Zhao Han. Zhao Han looked at him and then looked at Yu Xiaoxiao who was also staring at him. It won't. Do you see the knot in the rope? Once the hare runs into the lasso, the more it struggles, the tighter it will get. If we made it larger, not only would rabbits be unable to escape but also wild boars. The pair of siblings nodded their heads in unison. Their eyes were full of worship as they stared at the slender and young youth. The 13-year-old Zhao Han felt satisfied having the two kids adore him so much. He proudly waved a fist and said, let's go. The deeper we go, the more prey there is for us to catch. As Zhao Han turned, Yu Xiaoxiao took this window of time to open her water sack and sprinkled a couple drops of her mystic stone water around the trap. After that, she caught up with the two boys as if nothing had happened. Stinky Xiaoxiao, naughty Xiaoxiao. Don't you know you're wasting precious resources? This is the water that this heavenly stone, bathed in. It contains more restorative power than an old ginseng root. And you're using it to lure wild rabbits. The spirit came out of the multicolored stone in its familiar tiny golden kitten form. It climbed onto Yu Xiaoxiao's head. Other than its master, no one else could see it. Xiaoxiao placated the arrogant spirit mentally. Little glutinous dumpling, once we trap some game, I will reward you with some water taken from bamboo roots grown in the deep mountains. Didn't you say that the water from there would restore your spiritual power faster? Actually, the best way to restore its power was to help its master and gain its master's gratitude. However, the spirit never said it out loud as it was afraid that its master would give it more missions that it deemed beneath itself. Seeing that the arrogant spirit had finally calmed down, Yu Xiaoxiao's steps became much lighter. She could finally concentrate on learning how to set traps. Yu Xiaoxiao learned how to set traps very quickly because she was motivated. By noon, she could already do all the steps independently. Before she knew it, the group had entered the deepest part of the forest. Bam! A hard nut fell down and hit little Shitu's head. Yoch! Who hit me? Little Shito held his head and lifted his eyes to find the person who attacked him. Bam! Another nut smacked him on the forehead. An ash-gray squirrel peeked its head through the leaves and regarded the three humans inquisitively. Stupid squirrel, how dare you throw stuff at me? Little Shito picked up a rock from the ground and hurled it up towards the trees. The squirrel, with another nut in its paws, darted across the branches and disappeared. Yu Xiaoxiao bent over and picked up the lethal weapon from the ground and found that it was a hazelnut. She laughed. Shito, we hit the jackpot. This is a hazelnut tree. If we saute these nuts they will taste really good. When we're done setting traps, we should also harvest some hazelnuts so we'll have more variety to eat during winter. Little Shito was not interested in the idea and refused. I don't want to. All that hard work will not benefit us. We're not going to be the ones eating these hazelnuts. Zhao Han quickly ran through ideas in his head and came up with a solution. If you two trust me, then you can leave the hazelnuts at my home. Whenever you want to eat them, I'll have Mother cook them for you. You guys can then eat them at my house. That's not a bad idea. Yu Xiaoxiao grinned in delight. In the future, with the divine stone's water, the amount of game she caught would not be small. However, she absolutely could not bring the game home as she would not benefit from it. Not having a hiding place for her hauls had tormented her. Now, her problem was solved. It was as if she had been sleepy and a pillow had appeared out of nowhere. Zhao Han scampered up the extremely tall hazelnut tree. He plucked all of the ripe hazelnuts and let them fall to the ground. The harvest was going too slowly for Yu Xiaoxiao's taste, so she grabbed a thick branch and started whacking the hazelnut tree. Leaves and twigs showered down around them. This particular tree was on the older side. The hazelnuts it grew weren't very big, but the quantity of nuts wasn't small either. Within minutes, the three of them were able to pick a whole basketful of hazelnuts. Luckily Brother Han carried a basket all the way here. Otherwise I wouldn't know how we'd get these nuts back to the village. Little Shito grinned widely, and his eyes squinted up into small crescents. As the three of them went back on the same route they came on, Yu Xiaoxiao kept her eyes wide open to look for the traps they had set earlier. Seeing that, Zhao Han chuckled. Catching hares takes a little bit longer than that. Just as the words came out of his mouth, Yu Xiaoxiao interrupted him with an excited shriek. Look! What's that? Is it a small deer? So cute. This trap was one set personally by Yu Xiaoxiao. It was obvious that a young creature, barely out of infancy, had been caught by the rope. The animal had a coat of ashy yellow fur, pointy ears that curved up, a dark and round nose, and 4 slender legs. The fur on its butt and back legs were white and made it look like it was wearing a pair of pants with an open crouch, similar to the ones used for potty training. The little creature that had been caught didn't struggle at all. It stood in place stupidly and was nibbling on the nearby grass. Zhao Han strode over and, with one hand, caught the foolish little animal. He laughed. It's not a small deer, it's a dumb roe deer. This little guy is quite stupid. After getting caught, it didn't struggle to get out and is only interested in eating. Young children all loved small, cute animals. Little Shito went up to rub the creature's ears and cheerfully said, "Second sister, this roe deer is a little foodie." Shito naturally learned the term, little foodie, from his second sister. He applied it immediately to the little roe deer. Despite being delighted by her catch, Yu Xiaoxiao feigned being disappointed. Such a small animal. It doesn't look like it has much meat on it. Not worth much on the market. Second sister, we can bring it back to raise. Once it gets bigger, we'll have meat to eat. Little Shito was a foodie down to his bones. He challenged himself to take on the difficult task of carrying the roe deer back to the village. Although he managed to lift the animal off the ground, he could only stagger a few steps before he fell. The roe deer tumbled over with him. Fortunately, the ground underneath them had a thick layer of grasses and weeds, so neither of them were hurt. Yu Xiaoxiao dismantled the noose from the trap and then tied up the little roe deer with a lasso around its neck. She then gathered a couple handfuls of dried, yellow grass and poured the last bit of her celestial stone water on top of it. With that, she led the roe deer behind her. The rope was in one hand, and the grass was in the other. The small creature opened its large, dark, innocent eyes and followed her from behind, like a clever and obedient child. Second sister, do you think this little roe deer has been raised by humans? How come it's not afraid of us and even wants to get closer to us? Little Shido skipped beside the animal and occasionally ran a hand across its fur. Zhao Han guffawed. We're in the deep wilderness, not a household is in sight. Where would someone raise this? In my opinion, I think this little guy got lost from its mother. It probably thinks you two are its substitute mother. Yu Xiaoxiao wanted to cover her eyes in exasperation. Although her clothes were very dull and gray, this didn't come even close to the roe deer's coloring. How bad would the creature's eyes have to be in order to mistaken them as its mother? As they headed down from the mountain, more than half of their traps had caught some game. The other half had been destroyed by some sort of animal or other. Zhao Han was astonished by their luck. After carefully inspecting the surroundings, he realized that the vegetation near the broken traps had pretty much all been eaten down to a stubble. Looks like the wild animals on the mountain are pretty lively today. Are they all starting their winter preparations early? Zhao Han, who had never seen such a sight, was perplexed by the odd circumstances. He decided to ask his father what was going on today after his father got back from hunting. Yu Xiaoxiao was pleasantly surprised when she discovered that her scheme to making money had worked. She exclaimed, "Brother Han, we had a fruitful trip today." Yes, not only did we catch some hares but we also caught some pheasants. Even better is that most of them are still alive. My father told me that live game is easier to sell. Little Shido excited said. Zhao Han had to agree with them. Our luck today was quite good. However, with all this game, we can't possibly eat them all. In the afternoon, my father and Uncle Yu were planning on going into town to sell what they caught. How about we also let my father sell some of our game? I want to go into town too. Yu Xiaoxiao eyed the 10 animals that were on the ground. Judging by what she knew about Brother Han's personality, she figured she could get at least 2 or 3 from their harvest. Zhao Han was aware of her family's circumstances and thought a bit before replying. I've been to town many times and I'm pretty familiar with how to get there. How about I take the 2 of you there together? Yu Xiaoxiao became pleased beyond expectation when she heard his suggestion. Although she could convince her father to leave behind 1 or 2 pieces of game to feed her and her siblings, it was unlikely he'd ever be okay with having a separate, hidden purse from the rest of the family. From his perspective, he was helping the Yu family produce a future county scholar official or possibly even a provincial official. Having an official in the family would also benefit his children's futures greatly. This was the reason why he was happy to work so hard to earn money for them. If he knew his own daughter had her own supply of cash, he wouldn't sell her out. However, should Madame Zhang ever complain about not having enough money, he'd be hard-pressed not to let the secret out. With that thought, Yu Xiaoxiao became more resolute in her decision to hide her own money from her mother and father. She looked up at the sky and figured that it was still pretty early. She told Zhao Han to bring the hazelnuts and game back to the Zhao residence while she ran with little Shido back to their own home. They needed to retrieve that old ceramic pot. Oh ho! The 2 of them almost collided with their grandmother as soon as they crossed into the courtyard. Madame Zhang's eyes squinted in dislike and deep furrows appeared between her eyebrows. You little brat, you disappeared at the crack of dawn. Do you not know how to help the rest of the household do some chores? Yu Xiaoxiao blinked her eyes deliberately and looked at the elderly woman innocently. Grandmother, I also want to help gather fishwood, chop firewood, and other chores. But you know I have a weak body. What if I got sick from exhaustion and needed to spend money to see the doctor? For someone like me, it's probably better that I don't cause any trouble. Don't you think that makes the most sense? Madame Zhang didn't know what to say since everything Xiaoxiao said was true. Seeing that the little girl was carrying the large ceramic pot out, the area between her eyebrows smoothed out slightly. The old woman nodded in approval. Are you going out to catch some fish with that? Although the fish you caught last time were on the smaller side, they still had a good flavor. Your younger uncle's son, little Duzi, really enjoyed eating them. Catch some extra and I'll send some over tomorrow to your uncle. Yu Xiaoxiao frowned for a split second before she adjusted her expression into a congenial smile. There's no need to wait until tomorrow. Uncle Zhao's son, Brother Han, had caught some wild hares today and wanted to go into town to sell them. How about I go with him after I catch some fish? That way younger uncle will be able to eat some fresh and flavorful fish stew tonight. Madame Zhang didn't even hesitate before she agreed. This urn of yours is too small, how much fish can it carry? How about you bring a jug that we use to pickle vegetables instead? That should be able to carry enough fish to last your uncle a couple of meals. Yu Xiaoxiao recalled the size of the earthenware crocks, which were about 1.5 feet in height, and stared at her grandmother in mute silence before replying, "Grandmother, do you really think my tiny body has the strength to carry something that large? Then again, those fish aren't exactly easy to catch. I'm not sure I'd be able to catch enough to fill even this pot. Grandmother, I'm going to leave now. Brother Han might leave without me if I'm too late." Before Madame Zhang could reply, she pushed the ceramic pot into little Shitu's arms and scuttled into the kitchen. On the stove were 3 piping hot steamed rolls that had just been cooked. She grabbed 2 of the 3 buns from the basket, used some oiled paper to wrap them up, and placed them into her small carry basket that was on her shoulders. "Hey, you little minx, those rolls were for your grandfather and the other men," Madame Zhang, who had followed closely behind, cried out in distress. Yu Xiaoxiao had already clasped hands with her little brother and ran out the gate. Her voice floated back, "It'll take us a couple hours to walk to the town. If we don't eat, how will we be able to get there? Don't worry, grandmother. I promise that your precious grandson will be able to drink some fresh fish stew tonight." Although Madame Zhang wanted to chase after them, it was too late. The infuriated old woman stomped loudly around the courtyard and her curses filled the air. By the time the 2 siblings finished catching the fish in the valley and came back, it was almost 9 in the morning. When they arrived at the bottom of the hill that housed the Zhao residence, they saw Zhao Han at the top of the hill, carrying a large basket on his back. They could see the youth waving at them in the distance, hinting at them to not climb the hill. The 13-year-old was already over 1.7 meters in height. In addition, he practiced martial arts all year long, so carrying a load of more than 10 pieces of game was a piece of cake for him. Zhao Han strode over with his long and powerful legs and quickly reunited with the 2 siblings. The youth snatched the ceramic pot out from Xiaoxiao's hands in a natural movement and grinned, "I noticed that you 2 really seem to like that dumb roe deer, so I made the decision to leave it back home. Do you guys want to bring it back to your family or have it live at my place? It's your choice." Little Shitu's eyes were bright with happiness and he had a small smile on his face. "Second sister, let's bring it back home to raise. The little roe deer doesn't have much meat on it, so grandmother won't want to eat it right now." "Okay." Yu Xiaoxiao agreed without thinking too much about it. The little roe deer was quite adorable, and with the celestial stone water, it would probably stay docile. "If you're afraid your family members will harm it, just tell them that I caught it and wanted you guys to raise it for a bit." Zhao Han twisted his head around to talk to them as he continued to walk forward. As the 3 chatted, they had started walking on the road that led to town. When they passed the foot of the mountain, a thin figure with a small bag could be seen walking in front of them from afar. With keen eyes, little Shido had recognized the person in the distance. "Second sister, the person in front of us looks like Brother Qian Wen. He must be returning to town because his break had ended." "Brother Qian Wen. Brother Qian Wen." Without waiting for his sister's response, the little fellow had already cupped his mouth with his little hands and shouted. That figure stopped in his tracks and turned around to look towards them. As they gradually walked closer, Yu Xiaoxiao could see the young boy's face more clearly. He had fair skin and delicate facial features. With gentle and refined manners, he was a handsome young boy. With a fair and clean complexion. "Older brother Zhao, little Shido, is this your second sister?" Qian Wen's lips curled up slightly as he curiously looked at young girl with pale skin and big eyes in front of him. Little Shido was a good friend of his younger brother, Qian Wu. In the last 2 months, the kid had frequently mentioned his second sister. Little Shido grinned, "That's right, brother Xiaowen. Doesn't my second sister really look like my eldest sister? People usually mix them up. How did you recognize her immediately?" Qian Wen took the little fellow's hand and continued walking to town. "Although I haven't seen your eldest sister many times, the children of a fishing village usually have darker skin because they frequent the beach. Your second sister seldom goes out, so she has a lighter complexion." Little Shido carefully examined his second sister's complexion and firmly nodded, "That's right. Second sister definitely hasn't fully recovered yet since her face looks so pale." The little fellow had heard that sick people generally had a more pallid complexion. He didn't have a clear understanding of pallid, and just thought that it was unhealthy to be pale. Yu Xiaoxiao had a big, awkward character within her heart. Qian Wen, as a scholar, was it really all right to be openly discussing a young lady's skin color? As for her foolish younger brother, your sister has a fair complexion because she used mystic stone water to wash her face every day, all right. When did you see me being ill? This was called being pale with a rosy glow, which was very healthy. On the other side, her ignorant younger brother had already started chatting with someone else. "Brother Xiaowen, are you going back to town for your studies?" "We're going with Brother Han to sell game. Let's travel together. We'll have to walk quite a distance to reach town. Can you keep up, little guy?" "I can. I'm really amazing. Even second sister isn't as good as me." She just suffered another blow. "Shido, if you're tired, let me know. Brother Xiaowen will carry you." Yu Xiaoxiao never thought that the first person to become exhausted wasn't the 5-year-old little Shido, but herself. Her physical body had never traveled a long distance by foot. She had become much healthier after being nourished by the mystic stone water. However, after only walking such a short distance, her legs were already sore, and her entire body felt weak. They had only walked less than a quarter of the way, but Yu Xiaoxiao's little face was already turning wan. She wiped the sweat on her forehead, gritted her teeth, and kept on staggering forward. The tall and burly Zhao Han was naturally fine, and even the seemingly weak Qian Wen didn't seem tired. He wasn't breathless and his face wasn't flushing, while he strode ahead vigorously. Little Shido had been running around the mountains and seashore ever since he learned to walk, so walking on this road was rather easy for him. He was hopping and chirping throughout the trip, as if he was a cheerful little sparrow. Qian Wen heard a wheezing sound, which was similar to the sound of a bellows. He turned around and looked at Xiaoxiao with concern. "Xiaoxiao, give me your bamboo basket. I'll help you carry it." There were only 2 steamed buns within her basket, but it felt like someone was deliberately pulling down on her basket. Moreover, her legs were so sore that she could barely lift them. Qian Wen's bag didn't look very big, but was filled with heavy contents such as books and an inkstone. Besides, she wasn't very close with him, so wouldn't it be rude for her to let him carry it for her? "No need. I'll be fine after resting for a bit." Xiaoxiao shook her head and wiped the sweat on her forehead. She sat on the side of the road, gasping for air. Little Shido bit his thumb and said, "Second sister, with your speed, we might not be able to get back before it gets dark." Xiaoxiao gritted her teeth and forced herself to stand up. She nodded and said, "Let's hurry up then. We don't want to delay Brother Xiaowen's studies." At this time, an ox cart came from afar, while squeaking the entire way. After taking a closer look, they realized that the driver was Old Zhong from Xishan village. When Old Zhong saw them, he smiled good-naturedly and asked, "Aren't you the kid from Dongshan village's Qian family? Are you guys going to town?" Every 2 days, Old Zhong would transport a cart of firewood to town, which seemed to be a reservation made by a blacksmith in town. A load of firewood would cost over 50 copper coins. As long as the family helped out, this was a rather good deal for the Zhong family, who owned an ox cart. Grandpa Zhong, Xiaoxiao has a weak constitution and had never walked so far before. Can you please let her sit on your cart's shaft? Qian Wen saw that there was no room for people to sit on the ox cart, since it was stacked with firewood. Thus, he asked about the cart's shaft instead. "So this is the Yu family's Xiaoxiao. I've heard from your maternal grandfather that you've injured your head. Are you fully recovered now? How can your parents be so at ease with letting you kids go to town by yourselves?" Old Zhong lived close to Madame Lu's maiden family, so he swiftly agreed. He lifted Xiaoxiao onto the cart with his big hands. Even though she would occasionally feel the pain of being jabbed by the firewood behind her, but it was still much easier than walking on foot. Xiaoxiao watched as her younger brother excitedly guided the ox after being placed on its back by Old Zhong. "Brother Han, your basket is pretty heavy. Let me hold it." After all, Zhao Han was only 13, so it was quite tiring to travel while carrying so many game. There were over 10 game in his basket, which probably weighed over a dozen caddies altogether. His forehead was already covered with sweat. He looked at Yu Xiaoxiao, who was wobbling as she sat in the cart. His lips twitched and he shook his head. It's not heavy. I can carry it myself. Riding on the ox cart, the group finally arrived in town at around 10:30 in the morning. Tanggu town was still bustling with excitement like last time. After Xiaoxiao and her younger brother thanked old Zhang, he warmly arranged a meeting time with them for the trip back to the village. If the siblings wanted to ride on his ox cart on the way back, they could meet him outside the town gate at dusk. After parting with Qian Wen, Zhao Han handed the ceramic pot back to Xiaoxiao, and then held each of the siblings' hands as they walked on the busy street. The street was wide enough for 2-horse carriages to run side by side, and they could see horse wagons filled with cargo from the wharf rushing through the streets from time to time. In Xiaoxiao's opinion, as an essential route for transporting ocean freight to the capital, this was a small town with great potential for future developments. There aren't many people at the market in the afternoon. Should we go ask Fulin restaurant first? Zhao Han had followed his father to sell games several times in the past. He knew that his father had business with the 2 biggest restaurants in town, so he asked for the siblings' opinion first. Yu Xiaoxiao recalled how she parted on bad terms with Fulin restaurant when she was selling abalones last time, so she suggested, I reckon we should go to Junshou restaurant first. Junshou restaurant was slightly farther away than Fulin restaurant, which was one of the reasons that Zhao Han wanted to visit Fulin restaurant first. However, Zhao Han was quite surprised to hear Xiaoxiao's remark. Xiaoxiao, you've also heard of Junshou restaurant. In recent months, Junshou restaurant's business has indeed exceeded Fulin restaurant. Thus, they must need a lot of game. I heard that Junshou restaurant seems to have learned a method to make a special sauce with oyster from someone. Vegetables sautéed with that whatchamacallit sauce are even tastier than meat dishes. Oyster sauce. Halazi is also called shengao in the south. Hearing that Junshou restaurant's business was prospering due to oyster sauce, Yu Xiaoxiao was extremely proud inwardly and could hardly resist from beaming with joy. That's right, it's called oyster sauce. Zhao Han bowed his head, looked at her, and asked, Xiaoxiao, how did you know? Did Uncle Yu tell you? Of course, Yu Xiaoxiao wouldn't explain to him that the recipe for the oyster sauce came from her. Thus, she just nodded evasively. After walking for about 15 minutes, Junshou restaurant's magnificent sign appeared before their eyes. Wow, it's such a tall building. Little Shido gaped in amazement. It was his first time seeing a 3-story building after walking so far. Junshou restaurant's magnificent charisma and luxurious decor left a lasting impression on the little fellow. Noon was the busiest time for a restaurant. In front of Junshou restaurant, there was an endless stream of customers dressed in lavish silk brocades. There were also many posh horse carriages parked nearby. The tall horses were unsaddled and leisurely eating forage. Second sister, we should come back when there's less people. Little Shido noticed that all the people entering and exiting the restaurant were affluent people dressed in fancy attire. Looking at his own patched-up clothing, he felt somewhat inferior and was unable to move forward. Zhao Han grabbed his little hand and calmly said, Little Shido, we didn't steal anything or rob anyone, so there's nothing to be ashamed of. You guys wait here and don't wander off. I'll go over to ask. Looking at the young man's tall and handsome back, Yu Xiaoxiao felt as if she was looking at a young general who was preparing for his first battle. The entire Zhao family, from Grandpa Zhao to the 13-year-old Zhao Han, gave her the impression that they weren't a simple hunter's family. They would unconsciously radiate an imposing aura and a soldier's demeanor that a mere hunter's family wouldn't possess. The tall and handsome youth took up a conversation with the server who was greeting the customers. He put down the carrying basket, took out a wild hair that was still twitching, and said something to the server. At first, the waiter shook his head incessantly, as if they weren't going to take their game. In fact, big restaurants usually had their own means to obtain supplies, which were all imported goods. So, they naturally wouldn't accept goods from any random person. Young brother, we just caught these game this morning, so they're all fresh. Look at this hair, it's still so lively. Zhao Han tried his best to sell his game. They can't come all the way in vain. The young waiter shook his head and said, Sorry, but our restaurant doesn't need any more game. It's still really hot right now, so if we have too much, it will be hard to preserve them. Most of the game we brought over are still alive. Even if you keep them overnight and sell them tomorrow, they will still be very fresh. It was difficult for me to come here with my younger brother and sister, so please make an exception. Zhao Han gestured towards the direction that Xiaoxiao and Shido were standing. We're really not taking them. The server abruptly stopped in the middle of his rejection when looked towards the direction Zhao Han indicated. His eyes beamed when he saw the appearance of the little girl in the distance. He walked around Zhao Han and swiftly walked over with a smile. Miss Yu, I'm so happy to see you again. Ever since you left last time, our young boss had asked about you several times. He was afraid that some idiots wouldn't recognize you the next time you sent game over, so he specially transferred me over to greet the guests.